All right, let's bring up that script. Good evening, everybody. I'd like to call the meeting to order and welcome you all to the regular meeting of the Milwaukee Planning Commission. Agendas and additional copies of the staff report are available on the city website at www.milwaukeeoregon.gov. You may locate them by navigating to the community calendar where tonight's meeting agenda is posted. If you have not reviewed the agenda already, please do, and it contains important information about the process this evening. First on our agenda is the minutes. We will take approval of the minutes from August 24th, 2021. Does anybody have corrections to make note of?
I would like to approve the minutes from August 20, or make a motion to approve the minutes for August 24th, 2020.
I would second that motion.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. All those in favor? Aye. All right. Any opposed? Seeing none opposed. Thank you very much, everybody. Informational items. Any from staff? Vera, Laura?
I will just say briefly that, as you all know, we've been chatting. Halloween weekend is this weekend, and there's some great events going on in the city. So I'd encourage community members to check out the community calendar and head out to some great events here.
For sure. Gonna have to plan ahead to make sure you can get to each one of them. It's gonna be busy. This is a chance for audience to participate in our agenda. So this is an opportunity to comment on anything that's not on the agenda this evening. Vera, first off, do we have anyone in attendance?
We do. We have the applicant for our first hearing, and then we have two other folks from the community watching the meeting. Yes.
So let's take a look and see, community members, if this is your opportunity, if you'd like to use the raise your hand feature in Zoom to make a comment. You can also, if on the phone, just do *9 if you would like to raise your hand. So Vera, are we getting any interest in raising hand to talk about?
I don't see that anyone from our community that's in the attendees has raised their hand. No.
Okay. I'm going to move forward then to our first hearing item, which is property line adjustment and required variance at 2215 Southeast Harrison Street. The public hearing on the property line adjustment and required variance at 2215 Southeast Harrison Street is called to order. The purpose of this hearing is to consider applicant number VR-2021-014 PLA-2021-002. The purpose of the application is to request approval for various applications associated with a property line adjustment at 2215 Southeast Harrison Street. The applicant has the burden of proving that the application is consistent with the City of Milwaukee's zoning and subdivision ordinance, comprehensive plan, and any applicable municipal code provisions, and that the proposal conforms with all of the city's applicable criteria. Now I ask that the staff cite the zoning ordinance sections.
Milwaukee Municipal Code, Section 19.302, high-density residential zones, including the R1B zone. Section 17.28.040, general lot design. That's in our land division code. Section 17.12.030, approval criteria for lot consolidation, property line adjustments, and replats. Section 19.911, variances. And then Section 19.1006, type 3 review.
Awesome. Thank you, Vera. All testimony and evidence must be directed towards the applicable substantive criteria. Failure to address a criterion or raise an issue with sufficient detail to allow the Planning Commission an adequate opportunity to respond to each issue precludes appeal to City Council based on that issue. Failure to raise constitutional or otherwise issues related to proposed conditions of approval with sufficient detail to allow a response precludes an action for damage in circuit court. Any party withstanding may appeal the decision of the Planning Commission to the City Council. Persons withstanding are those who submit written comment or testify in person via Zoom. If you are here to testify, please remember, confine your remarks to the application and relevant criteria, and avoid any repetition or non-relevant information. If additional documents or evidence are provided by any party, the commission may, if requested, allow a continuance or leave the record open to allow parties a reasonable opportunity to respond. Any such continuance or extension shall be subject to the limitations of the 120-day rule unless the continuance or extension is requested or agreed to by the applicant. First, let's talk about conflicts of interest. Does any member of the Planning Commission wish to abstain from this hearing? Please raise your hand. Seeing none. Does any member of the Planning Commission wish to declare an actual or potential conflict of interest? Seeing none. Does any member of the Planning Commission wish to report an ex parte contact? And seeing none, thank you. Will any commissioner who has visited this site prior to the hearing this evening, please raise your hand? Seeing a number of us, all of us. Thank you, everybody. Did any of those commissioners who visited the site speak to anyone at the site or know anything that is different in what is noted in the staff report for this application? If so, please raise your hand. I'm seeing none. So moving on. And finally, does any member of the audience wish to challenge the participation of a member of the Planning Commission? Please use the raise your hand function or *9. No, Vera?
Nope.
Okay, great. Jurisdictional issues. Does any member of the audience wish to challenge the jurisdiction of the Planning Commission to hear this matter? Vera?
No.
All right. Let's move on. Vera, staff report.
Okay. All right, I'm going to share my screen and hope that it works. All right. Okay.
It worked.
Okay, let's see if I can. All right. Great, thanks very much, everyone. Vera Collier, Senior Planner, here to present the staff report for this application for a lot line variance and property line adjustment. The site in question is here outlined in red. You might remember it as the former city-owned pond house, just on the other side of the pond from the library. It's located at 2215 Southeast Harrison Street. The site is made up of 2 tax lots and has a combined area of approximately a quarter of an acre, 0.26 acres, contains an office building. The surrounding area consists of the Leading Library, Waldorf School across the street, attorney's offices, and multi-unit dwellings. Property is zoned residential R1B and does contain habitat conservation area and water quality resource area. The applicant has proposed a property line adjustment, or a PLA, between his property and the adjacent property to the north at 10565 Southeast 23rd Avenue. So you can see on the left where I've pointed out the property line in question. And then on the right is the plan from the property line adjustment. So that sort of dotted line is the existing property line as identified. And then there's sort of a jaggedy new property line just north of that. That is the proposed new property line. The PLA is requested to resolve a concern regarding potential encroachments, provide additional area for a landscape buffer, and is designed to preserve mature vegetation and an existing stacked rock wall, hence that funky line. The proposed lot line shape does not meet the standard that limits compound lot line segments or multiple changes in direction in a property line in our land division code, and requires a variance. And it does not qualify for a type 2 variance. That's why we're here for a type 3 variance for that lot line shape. The key issue that staff has identified, as with most variances that we bring before you, is would approval of the variance result in any negative impacts? Staff has not identified any negative impacts. As noted in the application summary, the applicant has proposed this lot line adjustment. The surplus property, or the amount of property that will exchange, is about 330 square feet along that common property line, and it provides the applicant with additional property to provide sufficient setbacks and sufficient space for an additional landscape buffer. Again, the proposed property line follows an existing stacked stone wall, which is why the shape is not rectilinear for the new property line. Given the limited scope of the affected area, a very small area is affected by the variance, including any mapped natural resources, and both property owners have agreed to the PLA. Variance is certainly supportable in this case. The discretionary relief criteria are the ones that you all are very familiar with. Alternatives analysis, and if there are any impacts, does the variance avoid or minimize any impacts, and does it respond to the existing built or natural environment, which is in fact the reason for this variance, is to respond to that environment and mimic that stacked stone wall and landscaping that is already existing on the sites. We did not receive any comments on this application. And the staff recommendation is to approve the variance and adopt the recommended findings to allow the proposed property line adjustment. The applicant is here virtually at the meeting and can answer any questions that you may have. Decision-making options for the commission: to approve the application with the recommended findings. That is the staff recommendation. You could approve the application with modified findings. We would need to read those modifications into the record. You could deny the application with new findings of denial, or you could continue the hearing. The 120-day deadline for this application is December 16th. And that concludes the staff report presentation. I'm going to stop sharing, and I'm happy to answer any questions. And again, the applicant is here as well.
Thank you, Vera. Let's see, Planning Commission, do we have any clarifying questions for staff? And I'm not seeing any, Vera.
Okay.
Let's move on in. Testimony. Vera, have we received any correspondence on this matter? You noted no in your presentation, but since you've made those slides,
Nope.
Nothing. Okay.
Nothing.
Okay, opportunity for the applicant to testify then. Would the applicant or their representative like to comment?
Okay. Ben is here, the applicant. Ben, I'm going to allow you to speak.
Ben, before you do, I just got to say a couple of lines here, but please state your name and your city of residence for the record before speaking. And then after your presentation, we'll have an opportunity for commissioners to ask any clarifying questions. So go ahead.
Good evening. Thanks for having me. And my name is Ben Hensel, and I live in Milwaukee, just down in Oak Grove. And I think this lot line adjustment is pretty straightforward. We're just trying to address an alleged encroachment by my new Eve on the development. And then it's not a straight line because of the stacked rock wall and the vegetation we're trying to preserve. I think it's pretty straightforward, but I'm happy to answer any questions, and thanks for your time.
Thank you, Ben. Commissioners, use your raise the hand function if you want to ask any clarifying questions. Otherwise, we're going to move on. Last chance there. Moving on. Okay, do we have, let's see, we're going to go into other testimony. So at this time, for those in the audience, if we have anyone who would like to speak in support of the application, again, please use the raise your hand function or pound *9.
We don't see any indication of that, Chair Musfield.
Okay, and then we'll move on then to anybody opposed to this application. Again, just raise your hand or *9.
Nothing.
Right, and then finally, neutral testimony. Anybody wishing to speak neutral? None.
No raised hands. Nope.
Okay, no need for rebuttal. All right, so we'll go ahead and close the public testimony portion of the hearing for VR-2021-014 and PLA-2021-002 at 2215 Southeast Harrison Street, closed. So opportunity now for the commission to discuss. Anybody wishing to talk about anything pertinent to this application? Want to start us off?
I'll go. Thanks, Chair. So this is, as the applicant stated, this does seem to be a pretty straightforward application. It's just trying to correct, remedy, a pretty simple matter, it seems like. Really the spirit of purpose and intent of the compound lot line standard is not to preclude things like this, but really, to avoid creating compound lot lines in subdivision scenarios. And so this really does, seem to have no impacts. It's really consistent with the spirit of the purpose and intent and the variance criteria as well. So I've reviewed the findings. I believe that they accurately reflect the evidence in the record, and I'd be happy to propose a motion to approve this anytime tonight.
We have a motion for approval. Do we have a second?
Second.
Okay, we've got multiple seconds. It's been moved and seconded. All those in favor, aye. All right, we've got 100% in favor. Thank you, Ben. Appreciate your time this evening, and thanks, Vera, for your presentation.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Good luck. All right, let's move on then. First of all, we've got to talk about appeal rights. If anybody wishes to appeal the decision to the City Council, you can complete an application stating the grounds for your appeal within 15 days of the mailing of notice of decision. Please see planning staff for details if you'd like to do that. We're going to move on to middle housing. So this is the continued hearing for middle housing, hearing number 2. The public hearing on middle housing code is called once again to order. The purpose of this hearing is to consider application number letter ZA-2021-002. The purpose of the application is to request approval for the application for code and map amendments for the first phase of the implementation of the city's comprehensive plan. If you are here to testify, please remember to confine your remarks to the application and relevant criteria and to avoid repetition and non-relevant information. The Planning Commission will make a recommendation to City Council regarding whether the proposal conforms with all cities' applicable criteria. I now ask that the staff cite the zoning ordinance section of which criteria can be found.
Sorry, there's a lot. Hold on. Okay. Let's see.
Vera, you should have this memorized. I
My,
think.
do you know how many sections there are? This is crazy. Okay. We have sections 301 and 302 for our residential zones. We have section 401 or 19401 for our Willamette Greenway zone. Section 19402 natural resources. Section 500 supplementary development regulations. Section 600 off-street parking and loading. Section 700 public facility improvements. And then finally, section 900, we have our land use applications, including sections 902 for comprehensive plan and code amendment process. We also have sections the 19.1007 type 5 review.
Nice. All right. All right, conflicts of interest. Does any member of the Planning Commission wish to abstain from this hearing? Please raise your hand. None. Does any member of the Planning Commission wish to declare an actual or potential conflict of interest? None. Let's proceed then to staff report. Vera.
Okay. Q, we have another PowerPoint presentation. So if I can share my screen. Okay. Go to slideshow. All right. All right, thanks very much. Hearing number 2 on the proposed code amendments. Just going to go over a couple of things that came up at the last meeting as well, but just for folks watching at home that might not have seen last week's last presentation. So again, we have some policy mandates coming from the comprehensive plan that have guided this code amendment process to increase the supply of middle housing and provide housing choice throughout the city, to increase tree canopy and preserve existing trees, again, throughout the city, and then manage parking to enable middle housing and protect trees in our residential zones. We went over this at the last meeting as well, but just wanted to provide a summary of the activities as part of the program or the process for this project since last September through August. So we had active project web pages. We had articles in the pilot every month throughout the project. We had our implementation committee meetings. And then you can see on the list of activities, a variety of virtual activities and handouts, both in English and in Spanish, NDA presentations, small group discussions, and then we had a series of Planning Commission and City Council updates throughout the process. Every month we were at both Commission and Council meetings to provide updates on the project. And then before these public hearings began, we provided both legal and extra notice for the public hearings, including starting in September with our 35-day public notice that included updates to the project pages, many emails and email blasts, including to all of the NDAs, posted executive summary of the project, and we used our city social media platforms to let folks know about the public hearings. We did a 28-day notice email blast as well, including a direct mail postcard to all residential and business properties in the city, letting folks know about the public hearing that was starting in September or in October. We did a presentation to the Rotary Club, and then we did a direct mail Measure 56 notice to all residential properties that was specific to the tree code. And there were 2 of those because there was an issue with the first mailing. So we did another mailing about a week later. So the tree code discussion will be held here or at the Planning Commission hearing on November 9th. And I'll get to that schedule in a second. There's also a newsletter article in the October pilot, and I believe there will be an article, or I think it's the column that Councillor Beatty has. Will be talking quite a bit, I think, about these code amendments as well in the November pilot. And then there will be some more tree code outreach and education materials coming up later in the fall and in the early winter. But we'll be talking about that more at the November 9th hearing. Speaking of, so the code review schedule with the Planning Commission at the October 12th hearing, we talked about middle housing and parking, and we took some public testimony, and we had a really great discussion with the commissioners. Tonight, we're continuing the discussion on middle housing and parking, and we want to address any of those lingering questions from last night. And again, take some more testimony, certainly from the public. And then we are asking the Planning Commission to continue this hearing to November 9th, which will focus on the development-related tree code. Again, address any lingering questions that are still coming, take public testimony. We are asking for a deliberation from the Planning Commission, and that we can finalize a recommendation to City Council. And that review schedule is, as you see here, we have the entire work session on December 21st to work through some of these, work through the proposed code with the City Council and talk about the Planning Commission recommendation that comes out of these hearings, and that we would then start the hearings in January and hopefully conclude on February 15th to have an effective code 30 days from then. So March 15th is the goal for the process. Okay, so at the last hearing, we went through sort of the entire, all of it basically, the entire code and sort of the key amendments. And then we had some really great discussions about each of the sort of key sections as we broke out the code. And so the focus of tonight's hearing is to talk about the questions and comments that came out of that hearing specifically. And so the first section that I wanted to talk about, the question was asking about flag lots and back lots. And the key question here was, should they be allowed in subdivisions? Currently, Title 17, our land division code, does not allow flag lots and back lots in new subdivisions. And again, we are proposing as part of the code that we would allow back lots, but there's a more specific question about allowing them in subdivisions. You can see in the photograph on the left, the outlined in blue or in teal are sort of your classic flag lots in existing neighborhoods. Those are in the Ardenwald neighborhood. And then on the right is an aerial photo of the brand new Cherokee Farm subdivision off Lake Road. And that was developed or permitted in the county, and the county allows backlots within new subdivisions, clearly, because there are 5 of them in the Cherokee Farm subdivision, and you can see them there outlined in teal as well. So a little bit of the history, and we talked about this a little bit back in the work session in the summer when we talked about flag lots and back lots, and this was part of a whole collection of amendments in 2002 that had to do with flag lots specifically. Back lots is a new idea that we're proposing in these code amendments, but you can see here sort of a summary of the various things that came out of those 2002 code amendments related specifically to flag lots. And again, you'll see in that third bullet point, they were specifically prohibited in subdivisions. And I think I included in the staff report that the reasons for those amendments was described. I found a 2002 public information release document that was part of this code amendment process. And it said that, for many years, the city has struggled with the changes and impacts to neighboring properties created by flag lots. And we talked about this a bit during our work session in August about sort of what the public sentiment was around flag lots, and that the NDAs and the commission and council had sought means to improve flag lot development and reduce impacts to neighboring properties. So one of those, and so there was a lot of concern about flag lots at the time, and so one of the ways that flag lots were sort of controlled as part of all this was to not allow them or flat out prohibit them, which means that variances are not possible. They are prohibited in subdivisions. But this was something that was raised at the last Planning Commission hearing on this topic, this idea of let's talk about it. Let's see, if we want to allow them in subdivisions. As we've talked before, flag lots are a form of what some people might think of as hidden density. They are typically used as infill development on some of those long, skinny lots that we're all familiar with. They are beneficial in subdivisions if a traditional lotting pattern isn't possible. In the example of the Cherokee Farms development, it's a slightly oddly shaped sort of parent lot for that subdivision. So what likely would have happened in this case is that we would have had these 5 lots would have been sort of narrower and longer, deeper, and may not have resulted in these additional homes. So in this case, it allowed for the sort of backlot development on this handful of, it's a 55 lot development. So 5 of them are backlots. The remainder are all very traditional, frontage lots that you might see in any subdivision. So the question is from staff as part of this discussion is, does the commission want to allow or recommend an amendment to the proposed code that would allow flag lots and back lots in new subdivisions? And then a sort of a sub question to that is, if so, should they be permitted outright, or should they be a variance? allow those backlots. So that's the question. That's question number one for tonight that I'd like to discuss. And maybe what I'll do is I'll stop sharing. I think you sort of have the image burned into your brains of what Sergio Farms looks like. So I'll stop sharing and maybe we could talk about what you think about backlots and flaglots in subdivisions.
Co-Chair Edge already has his hand raised.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, Vera. The question I have about the difference between just allowing them in a subdivision or requiring a variance, aren't subdivisions already type 3 reviews?
They currently are, yes.
That's changing from, is that what you're suggesting, is that the larger subdivisions will not be type 3 in the future?
Well, I mean, this all still is something that we're working through from the House Bill 450 or Senate Bill 458 that's going to talk about by right subdivisions for middle housing. So there's that aspect. But yes, currently subdivisions are type 3. I think what will likely happen, and once we work through what the Senate bill, all that means for subdivisions is that there will be a lesser form of review for subdivisions. They may be either by right or there will be a type 2 review process. But what is likely to happen, I think I can say, is that subdivisions would not be coming to the Planning Commission unless variances or something like that were necessary or were requested as part of the development. But the subdivision itself, as long as it met all of the standards of the code, would not be coming before the Planning Commission. No.
So then, I guess if it had a type 2 review, is that what you're suggesting, that the subdivisions would have a type 2, not just rubber stamp, but by right rubber stamp, but an actual type 2 review through staff? That's still appealable to through the Planning Commission, correct? Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Well, are you polling us for feedback in real time then? So I should kind of suggest where I am with this. Okay. Where I am with this is that I'm okay with these being allowed by right. I don't see any need to require a variance to get these approved. I think that it was a big win to get 10% density boost in Cherokee Farms, by doing this. And I don't think the impacts are that great. So I just don't see it being like, this is the preeminent design that we're going to see going forward, is a bunch of backlots in brand new subdivisions. I just don't see that being a problem. So I'm happy to support this without a variance.
Yeah, Commissioner Heimer, go ahead.
I want to say the same thing with Commissioner Edge, that I agree, and I'm trying to think of our large open areas where this may actually come into play. And actually, I can think of two open areas right now that could probably benefit from it, because you probably can't get in 3 streets into a subdivision, but you certainly could probably get 2, maybe 1. And so if we're serious about allowing more development and more, single dwelling units, whether they be duplexes or triplexes or quadplexes or even single family residents, it seems to be okay. I would be all right with the variance thing too, if everybody wants to kind of hedge their bet a little bit. But I think outright would be perfectly fine by me.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Sherman?
Thanks, Chair Losfeld. I think I'll echo what Commissioner Heimer said. I feel like I could kind of go either way, but I think allowing it by right, with potential appeal to the Planning Commission, it's probably a little bit more of a streamlined path. And I don't think this is an area where the sky's going to come falling anytime soon. So might as well make it a little bit easier. So I'm happy to go with that path. I do have a broader question though, about other parts of the code that I'd love to talk to if we have a second.
Okay, let's get to that after this. Commissioner Kosh-Robati?
Thank you, Chair Roosevelt. I would like to agree with the other commissioners. I actually would prefer the by right, just because I feel like the variance would be an unnecessary step. If it's pretty much going to be, okay, by right, it's already their property. It's already, I don't see why they would need to go through that step for to have to subdivide something they already own. Other than that, I think it's going to also be more encouraging to want to do more of these the middle housing as well. And they're going to have to abide by the additional codes that we have for whatever development they're going to need to put there anyway. So I'm not worried about it being a free for all or anything like that. But it does streamline it.
Okay. I'll just speak for myself and just say that my apprehension is only about tree coverage, and obviously at odds with tree coverage. If we're providing greater density, there's likelihood that we'll be in conflict with some of our existing canopies. However, just feeling like housing needs takes precedent priority. And I would be in favor of allowing this by right. I am not in favor of using any additional staff time or investment on the part of the owner of the project to go through a type 3 just for this piece. So anybody else do want to hear or discuss this topic before Vera continues? Or Commissioner Sherman, you had some other question you wanted to pose?
I just wanted to give a moment for any other questions if anybody had anything. Okay.
Commissioner Massey, are you?
Nothing to add.
Vera, I was just kind of curious, and we might have talked about it during our summer work session, so I apologize. I think I was just a little bit caught off guard in realizing that kind of variances are kind of generally prohibited on flag lots and back lots. And I think the more I was starting to think about this, I was starting to ask myself, and I apologize, I should have probably emailed you earlier today so we could actually have an answer to this, but like, how many flag lots have we had since 2002? I'm going to guess it's, maybe
not that many.
Not that many.
No.
Yeah. And I guess I'm just thinking out loud here, but I think as I was kind of looking at this list, it feels like a decision was made then to swing in a regulatory way that we are essentially prohibiting flag lots based on the development standards that we've taken. And this has just been an area that I've been thinking about, and I'd be willing to entertain thinking about this more if staff or other members of the commission wanted to think about making some changes there.
If I could, we have in the proposed code made some changes to that. So we're not prohibiting variances to aspects of particularly with the flag lot, with the pole width and those sorts of things. So we haven't kind of let them, be wildly different sizes and so on. We're still sort of sticking with the flag lot kind of dimensions and so on, but we are, the code that as we've proposed it does allow for variances to the standards that were previously prohibited. So we've opened that door a bit more on that. Yes. Yep.
Commissioner Hemer?
So I know one flag lot that's gotten built since 2002, and that's the one that I live in. That would have been, I think, 2007. But I think also what we'll see is that the land pressure and the aging of the population that lives in these larger lots, they will soon be, aged out of place. I don't know what the proper term is, but they'll get too old to be able to live there. Sell their properties, and which then opens up, the opportunity to build in these flag lots, because you'll probably have more of an opportunity. It's more economical than to tear down the front house and build out your two houses or three houses, I guess, if you can do two. And since we are reducing lot sizes. So for example, I live in an R10, and it's really hard to get, right, two lots out of, you need you need about a 25,000 square foot plot of land to be able to get two houses out of it. And so right now that we're reducing these zoning measures, it will certainly be more available. So, or an easier opportunity, I guess. And so I think we'll see a lot more of it. I think we'll see a lot more than that than we will see subdivisions. And hopefully that will help spur our middle housing that with the rules, with the new proposed code changes that we're giving to middle housing to give them an advantage on in these flag lots, hopefully that will help spur that development. I think the way that the code is written, I think it's a win-win-win for everybody kind of involved.
Thank you, Commissioner Hierro. Commissioner Massey?
This is not really a question so much about the matter at hand. It's more of a process question. Is that we're going to deal with, about 3 major issues during the evening. And so are the thoughts that we wrap these all up in one, or are we going to sort of make our positions known, sort of one at a time? Because there's a lot of complication in all these issues, I think.
Agreed. Vera, I think you've got a good kind of understanding of where we're going.
Yes,
Should we keep moving?
that would be
All
great. And I appreciate that. Thank you. Wanted the direction on this, recommendation, as discussed. So that will be reflected in the staff report for November 9th. That will will summarize the amendments that the commission, at least at this point, appears to be recommending for City Council. Okay. All right, if I may, let's go back to the PowerPoint. We're going to talk about parking next. So just getting everybody prepped for that. Okay. Go. All right. Hopefully, is everyone seeing this? Okay, there we are. Oh, great. Okay. All right. So part of the discussion that we had at the last hearing was about parking and particularly our off-street parking requirements. And one thing that came up was are there some further reductions that we should be considering as part of this? Within the staff report, I just wanted to summarize kind of what the current code proposal is, that it's 1 parking space per unit that's required. And there are some by right reductions that are included in the proposed code. Depending on where you are, there's a 20 to a 25% reduction for proximity to transit for your lot. There's a 50% reduction for income restricted housing. So those are sort of by right. Just take those right off the top. And then there are some alternatives through the parking modification process to parking location or numbers, and that's an existing process that we already have. The proposed code includes some additional sort of criteria or things that the planning manager would take into account when making a decision on a parking modification. But part of the discussion from the last meeting or the last hearing.
Vera, may I interrupt real quick?
Yeah, please go ahead.
This 1 space per unit, that is multifamily only, correct?
No, that's for middle house. That's for everything. Yeah, multifamily is separate. This is for middle housing and single unit residential dwellings. We're not permitted to require more than 1 space per unit for middle housing.
I hear you, but a 20 to 25% reduction for proximity to transit?
Yep, that in the proposed code, we've made that change to be for multi-unit dwellings and middle housing as a by right reduction. Yes.
Oh, okay, but not a single family dwelling.
Correct.
Okay,
Yep.
all right.
Sorry, I wasn't
I
sure.
wanted to make sure that was clarified for our audience and for myself as well.
Yes, thank you. So yes, so the by right reduction for proximity to public transit would apply to multi-unit dwellings and middle housing only. Yep. as proposed so far. Yes. Okay. So the question before us or for discussion is what came up at the last hearing was the idea of further reducing the minimum required parking for middle housing to 0.5 or half a space per dwelling unit. And I know that maybe that from a math standpoint, how does that work if it's only half a space? The way our code is written, our code actually rounds down for minimum required parking. So if you had, for example, a triplex or 3 units, they would be required to provide 1.5 spaces for the development itself. And then that would be rounded down as a minimum to 1. So that's sort of generally how that might work. And so that was the discussion from the last hearing. Staff would then ask the question, if that were the case, if we were reducing it further to the 0.5, would the by right reductions that you can see sort of above on that slide or that are proposed in the code, would those also apply on top of that 0.5 reduction? So that's a clarifying question that we'd like to cover as we're talking about the parking. But that's sort of the general question. But if I could, I know that I just wanted to kind of provide a little bit of context, because that would mean that, if the proposal is to require fewer spaces, that would not preclude a developer from building 1 space per unit, of course. It's just what the minimum required would be on the site. And so that would mean that if there were, additional vehicles or what have you for the development, then they would be utilizing the on-street spaces. If they had vehicles, they would be utilizing the on-street spaces. And so I just wanted to spend a minute kind of going through, we had the residential parking study prepared as part of our project process back in the spring to kind of get a sense of what's happening in our on-street spaces. We knew that that parking was going to be something that we were all going to be talking about and folks were interested in or concerned about, depending on the perspective, and just to have an understanding of what our on-street spaces, what is that situation, both from an inventory standpoint, but also an occupancy, or how are they being used? What's the demand for those on-street spaces? So just generally, the parking study was done back in the spring. Sample neighborhood study zones were used, and the methodology were 10 a.m. and 2 a.m. Occupancy counts to kind of get a sense of what was happening in the various neighborhoods to assess the parking demand or the vehicles per residential unit. And so you can see here on the slide, basically, the average supply is about 4 stalls per unit across the neighborhoods. Llewellyn neighborhood, that area had a higher than average supply. Ardenwald had a lower than average supply, and the collection of streets varied. It depends on if they're built out, with full sidewalk, curb, with a full complement of the right-of-way improvements. If they don't, then then things can be a little bit trickier when it comes to the on-street spaces. The average driveway supply on the properties was 1.87 stalls per unit. So that was sort of what was available within the neighborhoods as an inventory or the supply. And then when they went back and looked at the parking demand, the average minimum demand is 1.99 vehicles per unit. That's what was found and that was pretty consistent across the neighborhoods. The on-site demand in driveways, 1.5 vehicles per unit. The on-street demand was low. It was about 0.5 vehicles per unit. Lake Road had the highest at 0.89 vehicles per unit. So the on-street vehicles per unit the on-street demand was quite low across the various neighborhoods of the study areas. So what does all that mean for us? As part of the study or the findings from the study. And again, I just kind of wanted to reiterate that reducing the required minimum parking, however that if that happens or is recommended to happen, would not preclude a developer from building the full space per unit. And then this proposal is specific to middle housing. That was how this discussion was discussed anyway, was that the 0.5 would apply to middle housing development, but that the total parking supply averages about 4 stalls per residential unit, and then demand is about 2 vehicles per residential unit. But again, the on-street demand is very low right now. It's 0.5 vehicles. So there's an abundance across the study area through the findings of on-street parking availability, throughout the area. The occupancies in the on-street supply could be higher, post-COVID kind of thing, but those users are likely to be non-residential. There just weren't folks using the on-street spaces. The neighborhood conditions vary. As I said earlier, different streets are built out with the full complement of frontage improvements. Other ones are not. And as part of our overall development policy,
Am I frozen or is Vera frozen?
I think Vera's frozen.
Thank you.
I'm glad you asked. I don't understand. She had broken up a little bit earlier too, if I'm not mistaken.
Can you all hear me? Is
Yeah,
that
we
I
good?
hear you, Laura. Yes.
Okay. So Vera's sitting right next to me, and all of a sudden I couldn't hear her in my earphone. So I'm not exactly sure what's happening. I might just,
Her video is frozen and no audio, but obviously we hear and see you.
okay. So hang on just a second.
okay. All right, hold on. Can I just double check? Okay. I just kept talking. I didn't know what was going on, so.
Oh, it's all good. We were nodding our heads.
Okay.
You should be happy that we noticed almost immediately.
Did you? Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So how far did I get before that happened? I'm so sorry. Oh my gosh. Okay. I'm going to go back to the presentation and someone's
You
going
were
to tell
just
me. if I-
talking, Vera, about the capacity of street parking that we
Got it.
currently have. And
Okay. And we have a lot of it. Is that,
yeah,
did
we
get
got that.
Okay.
That
Great.
was loud and clear.
Perfect. Okay. Thanks, everyone. Technology is so awesome. Okay. All right. So then I guess, just to make sure that people understood that sort of because of the neighborhood conditions varying and what everyone's built out street looks like or feels like, folks might be using their on-street parking differently right now. If they don't have the curb and the paving and so on, folks might be parking a little bit tighter. So once improvements are made with the additional dwelling units, some of that on-street supply could be reduced because we've actually improved it and we're sort of creating where folks are supposed to be parking. But overall, the on-street demand right now is about half a vehicle per unit. And there was, depending on the neighborhood, a notable percentage, is how Rick Williams put it, of residential units with multiple vehicles. And we all know that, sometimes folks have that, and so they're utilizing either their front yards or sometimes the street for the additional vehicles in their homes. But that just kind of goes over the sort of the findings of the residential study to let us know and kind of where we were with all of this. At this point, data from that study suggests that we, at the time, that the city could require the, the 1 space per unit approach, based on what House Bill 2001 allowed and required. But that would work, but we can certainly be talking about, as we are now, about a reduction in that number of units. And then I did have a discussion, or there was a question raised earlier today, sort of about how does the House bill kind of talk about parking and what can we be asking for? And again, we can't ask, or we cannot require more than 1 off-street parking space per unit. But the model code developed as part of House Bill 2001 and the House Bill language itself in the OIR talks about, and why is this, my slide is not advancing for some reason. Okay, hold on, I'm going to escape out of this really quick. because I think I need to reshare is what I'm thinking. I'm going to escape out of here. Okay, let's see. There we go. The model code and the House bill talk about parking that ties the dwelling type to the size of the lot. So I'm adding sort of an extra layer of things to think about here. But for example, for triplexes, they break it out how many spaces you can request for a triplex based on the lot size that the triplex is on. So if the lot is less than 3,000 square feet, the model code would require 1 space. 3,000 to 4,999 square feet, 2 spaces, and for 5,000 or greater for a triplex, 3 spaces. So it's looking at the housing type, but it's also matching that up with the size of the property. And then you can see on the slide what the model code talks about for quadplexes, similar to triplexes, but then if the lot is greater than 7,000 square feet, then it's sort of the full 4 spaces of the 1 space per dwelling unit. And then the model code also, of course, talks about townhouses and cottage clusters and requires the 1 space per unit for those. But the triplexes and quadplexes, it's an interesting combination between the housing type itself as well as the size of the lot, and takes that into account as far as how many spaces it's requiring. So there's slightly different way of thinking about it. So the ultimate question here, and I will stop my sharing here, is sort of the proposed code right now does have some by right reductions. We do have a parking modification proposal or option for folks, but the proposed code right now has the one parking space per dwelling unit. So the question or the discussion topic for the Planning Commission is there a recommendation from the commission to change that or do something differently?
We've got a couple hands up. Commissioner Massey, go ahead.
Sure, this is for the staff. I think I know the answer, but what was the CPIC recommendation?
Oops. The CPIC recommendation was the 1 space per unit, which was what the House Bill 2001. There was, I guess maybe what I would say is that that's kind of where we came out of this. We didn't take a vote of CPIC. There were members of CPIC that suggested less parking, but in general, the proposed code that came out of that process was the sort of the House Bill 2001, not the model code necessarily, but the 1 per dwelling unit was sort of where we landed throughout the process.
So would it be accurate to say the consensus of the CPIC was 1 spot per unit?
I'm not sure I would say that either, because there were a few members of CPIC that wanted us to consider less parking, a smaller parking requirement, off-street parking requirement.
So I guess my question is that why did the recommendation come forward for 1?
1 is what we were allowed to request or require as far as that goes. There wasn't a consensus for any particular number. 1 was what is permitted from the House bill. There were, concerns about parking, both over parking a site and under parking a site. And so the general kind of the direction in the proposed code was to kind of stick with sort of the minimum, I guess, from that standpoint of what the House bill would allow, and that we would go through the hearing process and see where we landed through more public comment, and then of course through the public hearings with the commission and with the city council.
Thank you.
Commissioner
I would remind everyone that there were, like multiple meetings of the CPIC. So, I would think that we had a, fairly robust, discussion of this topic. Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you, Commissioner Massey. Commissioner Hemer.
Yeah, I just have a series of questions, I think, right off the bat. So on that slide that you showed of the model thing, when they say 7,000 square feet, does that mean per each townhouse? Or does that mean how many townhouse, they could get in as many townhouses as they want in a 7,000 square foot lot? Or does that mean each townhouse is sitting on a 7,000 square foot lot?
if I may, so I think, so the townhouses in the model code each have one space. That's different. If I think for the 7,000 square feet, you mean for a quadplex.
Oh, I'm sorry, the quadplex.
You're right,
Yeah,
right.
I'm sorry. I
So,
apologize.
so that was the way that was written, is that the property on which the quadplex sits, so 4 units is on a 7,000 square foot lot. That's how many parking spaces. It's for the whole lot. It's not for each.
Not for each
quadplex.
individual. Okay,
Correct.
and then, and when this traffic study, or when the parking study was done, right? The old code, or the not the new proposed code, right, required a garage as your parking unit inside there. So
That's right.
did they assume that there was a car parked inside a garage, or were they just counting cars that were out on the driveway?
Yes, it was just driveways. They actually did not assume parking in garages. I'm almost positive that's true.
Okay.
Let's see.
Because that was our parking standard before, correct?
Yes,
Or is the current standard?
right. That's
All
right.
right, and then my next question is how much space is a parking spot? So, you know, is it 12 feet? Is it 16 feet? Is it, right? If you were to look at, they say, well, the average is 4, so I'm assuming it's 4 times 16 or 4 times 20. So the average lot is 80 feet wide, maybe,
Right.
right, is what I'm trying to get at. Do we know what that number was used?
So the, yes, so a parking space per our code is 9 feet wide by 18 feet deep. So that's how we measure, that's how the zoning code measures a regulation parking space.
So they're
residential
assuming
property.
18 feet, right, minus the driveway. So we're actually talking about 100 feet. We're talking 100 feet on each,
Yeah,
lot
so
on average?
yep, sorry. So I'm actually looking at the study right here. So I'm going to correct myself on the garage capacity was estimated by counting the number of doors located on the garage. So if it was a double wide garage, they did in fact assume
Assume that there was a car
spaces,
parked in
yes.
each one.
That's
Okay.
right.
All right,
Yep.
all right, that's good.
And then when they were looking at, so when they were measuring capacity for on-street spaces, if
Uh-huh.
that was your question,
Uh-huh.
they actually used a measuring wheel and walked all of the blocks to measure the spaces. And so they used a length of 23 feet and a width of 8 feet per stall to figure out their inventory of available on-street parking spaces.
Okay, so they just took it on the average on a whole, not necessarily per lot, right?
Correct.
They didn't,
yes.
they didn't measure each individual lot and then come
No.
up with an average. They just walked the street and
That's
said
right.
this is an average. Okay, all right, that's, I'll reserve my comments.
Okay, Commissioner Edge?
Thank you, Chair. So one of the things that I think this feels very abstract, right? We're dealing with ratios, you know what I mean? You know, it's all, 1.99, vehicles per household. It's 4.05 spaces, per, dwelling. Capacity, it's hard to kind of wrap your head around it. So I'm wondering if we can put these in nominal terms. So our supply, and I know we're only talking about these 4 neighborhoods, we're not talking citywide. But when we're looking at 4.05 stalls per dwelling, and we have 646 dwellings, that comes up with a supply of 2,616 parking spaces in these 4 neighborhoods. Our demand is 1.99 vehicles per household. Similarly, times 646 households. We're looking at a demand of 1,286 parking spaces. So that gives us a capacity, starting capacity of 1,331 spaces that we're working with in these 4 neighborhoods. This isn't even citywide. This is just these 4 neighborhoods, just where we focused on the parking study. Now, I'm not really fond of that 1.99 number. I don't think that's reflective of, reality moving forward, but that's the data we have in the record. I'm not going to argue with it. That's what we say the demand is per household is basically 2 cars, whatever, let's use it. So let's try to figure out what our capacity is when we require, 1 space per dwelling. So if we have a demand of 1.99 per dwelling, you subtract 1 space per new unit. We have a capacity to accommodate 2 cars per household at 1 space per household contributed. Another 1,344 dwellings before we reach capacity of our parking in these 4 neighborhoods. Our buildable land capacity, our buildable land inventory, the number of lots available for redevelopment right now in the whole city is 765. So, I mean, we were talking about this 2 weeks ago at a 3%, market absorption rate for new, lots and getting middle housing on new lots. That means we're looking at an additional 24 dwellings of middle housing citywide over the planning horizon. I mean, really, that's the whole buildable land inventory, and I don't know that we've ever exhausted the whole BLI in 20 years. So I think that, really, what is the impact here when we're talking about 24 dwellings, 2 cars per dwelling, and we've got a capacity of 1,300 spaces in these 4 neighborhoods, and the 24 is citywide. 24 dwellings is citywide. So that's what, 48. If we require no parking spaces, that's 48 cars associated with 24 additional dwellings citywide, and these 4 neighborhoods can absorb 1,344 parking spaces. So this just isn't screaming to me that we have a problem. If we required no parking, we would have a capacity for 669 additional dwellings before we would reach capacity in these 4 neighborhoods. So at half a space, 893. I mean, these are big numbers compared to what our production is going to be of dwellings. So I'm completely comfortable considering with this commission writing down the number of parking spaces that would be required with each new dwelling. I just don't see how the production that we're going to get from middle housing is going to create a noticeable impact whatsoever based on these numbers from these 4 neighborhoods. So I'm completely comfortable with writing this down to a half a space or lower.
Thank you, Commissioner Edge. Commissioner Kashrabadi?
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted, pretty much echo what Commissioner Edge said. We obviously have the capacity, and I think that was something that might be on a lot of people's mind initially. And I think when people see the numbers, it's pretty telling that there's plenty, as you stated, just in those neighborhoods. The key to this really is what it's going to do moving forward, primarily as it pertains to affordability for housing and climate. I mean, we're headed in a direction right now where, I mean, I don't think many people can deny changes are going to happen, changes are going to have to be made. And I think this is a good place to at least start to build from, reducing the number of spaces. That in turn, again, is gonna result in reducing the cost of building these middle housing units. And if we're trying to incentivize, which I don't think we do enough of, people to build these middle housing units, then this is another thing to do that with. We have the capacity for parking. I don't think there's an issue with that. So, unless there's an argument better than what it's going to do for the future of our climate, as well as the future of housing affordability, I agree. Let's make it half or even lower.
Thank you, Commissioner Kashrabadi. Commissioner Sherman?
Thanks, Chair Losfeld. I think really want to thank staff and thank fellow commissioners for spending some time on this. I know this has been, I think as it said in the intro to this is an area we've had to spend a lot of time. So I appreciate that. And, you know, thinking about the time that not only we've spent on this, but the time consultants have spent on this, the community has also spent on this. And I think just the thing that I keep coming to, especially around the parking reduction for middle housing, not single dwellings, but for middle housing, is kind of asking ourselves, like, the work that we're doing, is it going to have an impact? And I think, as Commissioner Edge brought up, you know, 2 weeks ago, we're still talking about a fairly insignificant impact. And as we are thinking about these changes, I think we should really be thinking about how we can have a real impact on housing affordability to create more options for young people, single people, families, people living on fixed incomes. And also asking ourselves if we're still like leaving barriers in the way, barriers that we could have removed to promote, you know, one more duplex or one more quadplex. And when I think about those barriers, I think about minimum parking requirements as one of those barriers. And I worry that if we don't take some action here, you know, we'll be able to say that we care about middle housing, but we didn't back it up with action. And we'll be able to say that we care about tree canopy, but we didn't back it up with action. And so I hope that we can rely kind of on the evidence, which suggests we clearly have substantial supply of on-street parking, and that will be bold and, you know, move forward with this proposed change. And I myself would even be comfortable going further. So just wanted to thank everybody for the time and discussion on this.
Thank you, Commissioner Sherman. I'm noting that we are having a potential discussion about going lower than the 0.5. I want to hold that and give Commissioner Hemer an opportunity to respond.
Yeah, so the traffic study I actually was very interesting, because when we first started talking about this, I was like, you guys are nuts. But when you look at the traffic or the parking study, you're right. There is no actually cause for alarm. I still do worry about what I'm going to call the extension cords over the sidewalk. So I hope that there is a way that we can come up with a remedy where maybe you're allowed to have the box on the curb or something like that, you know, that you can plug into, so that we don't have these extension cords coming over. What I do find interesting is that they say, oh, well, once curbs and sidewalks get developed, then parking gets a little bit harder. So our standards say, hey, you build one of these things, you got to do all these curb and sidewalk corrections too. But when I think about it on my street, so right, I live in the one where all the 4-foot easements are all just grass, you know, and the mailman runs through the ruts and, you know, drives and spreads dirt all over the road, right? And people kind of park in bushes and stuff like that because all this stuff is out there. But, right, if you, like my neighbor actually has a little curb at where the right-of-way actually is, and they use that as a parking pad, and I use it as a parking pad when I have to get a vehicle out or whatever out on the street, and it doesn't cause a problem. So, right, if you think about it, if all this 4-foot right-of-way is right, that actually gives us, you know, an extra 4 feet, right, because people have a tendency not to park on their lawn. So I don't think it's a major problem. My only, I do have an issue though with giving a deduction by right by transit. And the reason why I say that is that, you know, not every transit stop is considered the same, I guess. So we have these ones for like high speed or like normal or whatever that thing's called. Just knows what it's called, but you know, like continual trips or something like that or whatever it is, right?
Frequent transit.
Frequent transit. And I think that's okay. But like I think about my bus stop that's out on my corner. I mean, you know, a bus comes like every hour or something like that, or you know what I mean? So reduction by right makes it a little weird, especially if you got to draw a circle, right? And somebody's going to say, well, I'm close, or, you know, I'm not quite sure how you really define that area. But if we make it the rapid transit or whatever, however we frequent stop transit, I think we're in better shape there. And my only other point is on the triplexes, because I hate the fact that you end up with a 1.5 number and you're going to round down. I would like to make that 0.6667. So basically 2/3. So you end up with 2 parking spots and 1 non-parking spot instead of this 1.5. Or you might as well just say, you know, a 0.5 or 0.25 if you just want 1. You know what I mean? It's just, it doesn't really matter. I'd rather go 0.667 myself, but.
Commissioner Hemer, what about 0? That's just easy math.
I don't think 0 is the correct number, because still what you find, and I know Commissioner Edges and Commissioner Ertz are going to tell me, well, the future is not that, because we're all going to be ride sharing and we're all going to be taking, you know, jetpacks or something like that. But the average number is still 2 vehicles per household. And especially if it is 2 people that are coming into, you know, kids are getting married at later ages now. We are still kind of a suburbia. So you're getting younger families, people that generally need these cars to get their kids to soccer practice, to get groceries, to run errands, to do all that kind of stuff. So I think allowing 1 vehicle and then getting it out, then the other vehicle to get out on the street. So I would at least like, you know, some semblance of off-street parking, even though that the numbers would tell you logically that would not necessarily need to be the case. But I don't think 0 is the ultimate answer.
Commissioner Massey or Commissioner Ernst, do you want to add anything to this? Otherwise, I'll go to Commissioner Edge, but I just want to make sure you get a chance. Okay. Commissioner Edge?
Thanks, Chair. So what I'm really thinking about when I'm thinking about 0 spaces, what I'm really thinking about is are these sub 5,000 square foot lots where we're trying to get a quadplex? And so I have a couple questions here that are standards related. And so I've seen some plans recently for some quadplexes that are about 40 by 40 feet. You know, roughly 40 foot square. So just doing the quick and dirty math on that, that's 1,600 square feet. You've got let's just start with a 3,000 square foot lot. What's the largest footprint that we could have?
Let's see. I'm going to need to do some quick and dirty math.
Yeah, but the idea, right, it's almost 1/3. If your vegetation is 30%, right?
Yeah.
You could probably use 1/3 and that would get in the driveway in there too.
Probably.
For quick and easy math.
Yeah.
So 2/3 of it can be a building?
That's probably right. I mean, the way we've sort of talked about, let me look in our low density zones really quick, because I just want, yeah, because it's 30% cover or vegetation. That's probably right. Yeah. So 2/3. So that's probably, yeah. So 1/3 is going to have to be the vegetation. And then you'd have to make sure obviously that you can meet, because then you've got your lot coverage, and on a 3,000, so that's 35% lot coverage is your maximum. So, but and minimum vegetation is 25% on a lot that's 3,000 square feet. It's actually not even 30. So it's a quarter of that.
Right.
Yeah. So, and then you'd have your setbacks. So if it's 3,025, so 6. Let's see. Do you have another question while I'm working out this math?
Well, I mean, really what I'm trying to get to is there even room for a driveway? You know, if you get a 1,500 square foot, you know, building, or maybe a slightly smaller, maybe a 35 by 35 you could make work. you know, but you know, can you even get a building that? Because you know, what I want to do is I want to make this legal. I want to make it legal to have a quadplex on any lot. We can have a single or a duplex or a triplex. And if that's what we're trying to accomplish, then I want to make sure that it can physically fit.
Yep.
And you know, within standards. And so that's what I'm really trying to explore here. And then in terms of that, is there even room for a driveway when you do that?
Yeah.
And if so, how many driveways at 8 by 18?
Right.
Standard driveway width is 16 feet, right?
The minimum driveway width is 10 feet for our,
okay.
or actually it's 9 by our engineering. Like if you were just going to do a single driveway, minimum width is 9 and the parking space is 9 by 18. So, and that 40 by 40 Commissioner Edge that you were talking about, so that's the footprint of the quadplex of the whole quadplex or the whole thing?
Yeah.
Got it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, because if you take off the top of a 3,000 square foot lot, you've got 25% vegetation. So that's 750 square feet, 3,250 miles. So you're left with about 1,600 square feet, basically, after, you know, vegetation and your footprint of your building. And so then if we assume the 9 by 18, you know, 160 plus 1,650, you know, you'd still have over almost 1,500 square feet of space, you know, so you're building out just a little over half, you know, of that with the 1,600, 3,000, 2,250. Okay, hold on. Yeah. 16.
I don't want this just to be a fancy concept. I want this to be
no, it's not.
Be executed.
It's a box. That's basically what it's squares. So you could fit a parking space on that 3,000 square foot lot with that 1,600 square foot footprint. A parking space. Yeah.
A parking space.
Yeah, maybe 2. Depends, but yeah, for sure you could get one, I think. Yeah.
So I guess what my question would be for the commission is, would we be more interested in doing like a modified ratio, like the quarter space or a half space, or having something that's really just tethered to the size of the lot and saying this lot really doesn't have room to contribute anything at less than 3,000 square feet. So it's 0, 3,000 to 5,000, it's 1, 5,000 to 7,000, it's 2, 7,000 plus, it's, you know, whatever, 3. I don't know. I mean, do we want to do something like that where it's based on the size of the land that's being developed, or
so you use the model, use the model code?
Well, I think the comp plan that we adopted last year really pushes us to go a little bit further than what the model code suggests.
I'm sorry, use the model code model.
Yes, that's exactly right. But write each one down a little bit so that we're being a little bit more in line with our vision, rather than just strictly doing the model code, which I consider kind of a minimum, you know, minimum compliance, which I don't think is what our vision suggests we should be striving for.
And I think that makes sense too, because generally the smaller the unit, maybe the lower economic threshold, which we know is that it has a reduced parking or a reduced vehicle right with it.
That's just good science, Greg. That's good science.
Commissioner Massey?
Yeah, I would be willing to, you know, support something on the, you know, the sort of the tiered hierarchy that Commissioner Edge has proposed. But I'm concerned about going to 0.5 or to 0, you know, based on the fact that this proposal has come to us through, you know, multiple CPIC meetings and staff review that, you know, shows some, you know, need for parking. And so I'd certainly be more willing to entertain an idea of a tiered approach on the size of the lot. But that kind of gets us into a chicken and the egg thing. We have to kind of tackle the size of the lot and the types of dwellings on the lots, because they're related, obviously.
Thank you, Commissioner Massey. Does anybody want to respond to proposal Commissioner Edge is making.
Well, I just wanted to add really quick, since I was the Planning Commission liaison to the CPIC, that I could comment on, a lot. I mean, you could too, Lauren.
Go ahead.
Comment on the discussion with the parking at CPIC. We never got into nominal figures like I asked us to do tonight. I don't remember ever talking about hundreds or thousands of parking spaces. I always remember just talking about ratios. And so I don't think that we ever really had the discussion that was like, well, here's the actual inventory and here's how it relates to our buildable land inventory and what our actual capacity is for production, housing production. I don't think we ever had that complete conversation, in those terms, in that setting. And maybe Vera or Laura, can correct me if I missed a meeting. I know I missed a couple. But I don't think we ever discussed it in these terms. And so I feel like that really shed a whole new light on this for me in terms of gauging impact. And I think that if the CPIC had maybe that same discussion, that you may have seen similar responses as you did with some of the commissioners tonight, where it's like, oh, well, actually, I guess we can really absorb a lot of this. But Laura or Vera, do you want to, or Lauren, do you want to comment on what I may have missed at CPIC?
I would only comment to say that I remember or recall the same. And I also want to point out that we do have some folks here in attendance who are, I think, are interested in commenting on this piece. So I almost want to, get to Commissioner Kashrabadi, Commissioner Sherman, if you have any new points to add to this conversation, because I think we're kind of coming around to something, but I kind of want to get through this so that we can also hear public testimony. So with that in mind, Commissioner Kashrabadi, no, okay. Commissioner Sherman.
Just briefly, I think I would add, I'd also be willing to consider kind of a tiered approach. I'm just trying to think about outcomes here and how are we actually getting towards those outcomes. So happy to kind of entertain that with others. And, would also say that I think, the city's parking consultant who did this study also didn't spend a lot of time even when presenting with us, talking about the amount of oversupply there. So I think it's just one of those things that's been, hiding in the data, waiting to be kind of exposed and talked about. And I'm really happy that we're doing it. And again, want to thank staff and fellow members of the commission for taking the time to do that.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I feel kind of, Vera, like the presentation you've just given regarding parking is the greatest depth that we've seen and discussed at this point. All these conversations that we've had. So I do want to keep going, Vera, and I think you've still got some content to cover.
I do. So can we put a pin in the parking piece and for a moment and we'll come back around? Okay, great. Because I know we actually have one of the attendees in the audience is Stefan Lashbrook, and he has put his hand up. So at some point when we get to the end, he was a member and was on the CPIC as well. So when we get to that point, it'll be great to hear from him. Okay. Let me come back to, all right. I think I can do it this way. Okay. Let's see. All right. My slide is not advancing. There we go. Okay. One of the other, and this somewhat related, I think, but there was general support from the Planning Commission to further reduce the minimum lot size beyond the lot sizes outlined in the House bill. That kind of went with the housing type. That would provide additional opportunity, of course, to developmental housing that could be smaller. And thereby hopefully less expensive. Given that the development and design standards that would apply to the development, it's unlikely that there would be a large number of these, small lot things, but it's, certainly it provides some more creativity for the designers and the architects out there, I think, to figure out how to make this work. But but providing more housing opportunities is a very clear policy directive from the comp plan, and this proposal would certainly do that. So what this slide does is kind of summarize sort of where the changes were as I understood them, from the Planning Commission. And so the idea was that we would be allowing on the smaller lots, the triplex so as they're highlighted, the triplex and the quadplex would be added to the permitted housing type, on that 3,000 and up lot size, and that we would allow the quadplex on that 5,000 and up lot size. So depending on, I guess, on your perspective, it actually doesn't feel that controversial or that, significant, because we are sort of just scooting some additional permitted housing types on some smaller lots. And I think I'm hoping that reflects the discussion accurately, but that was the idea for that. I just wanted to make sure that I heard it correctly and that I reflected it correctly in the chart, because if that's the recommendation, then that's something that I want to memorialize properly to go to City Council. So I just have the one slide on this particular topic before we go to the last topic of the staff report, but I wanted to make sure that I got this right from what I heard.
I guess, and maybe it makes sense to go back to gallery mode just to double check with everybody, because I do see a hand raised. Commissioner Massey.
Thanks, Vera. From a couple of weeks ago, I thought that we sort of left the meeting with the idea that we were going to try to gain some insight into, how the tiered structure was developed and how it related to the 3% goal. Were you able to find out anything?
Well, we were able to, and I might ask Laura to chime in on this about how the 3%, and what that means from the relation and its relationship to House Bill 2001 and sort of what that number means. So, and I know Laura spoke with DLCD staff today to kind of get some information on that. Laura, can I ask you to chime in on that piece? That'd be great.
Yes, thanks. So I think that the 3%, Commissioner Massey was really talking about how much development / infill the city is projected to get, or cities around the region are projected to get over a 20-year time span. And we weren't, the number is projected to be about 3%. And so that's all that number is getting to, because it was really targeted at looking at housing needs analysis. So when cities do their buildable lands inventory, they're not allowed to project more than 3% growth within their city. So it wasn't specifically tied to the tiers, as I understand it. It's more about allocating buildable lands.
Thank you.
Commissioner Kashrabadi.
Thank you, Chair. Quick question. I don't know if we went over this before, but what was the reason, or is there a reason why we didn't include duplexes in the 1,500 square foot if we're doing the row houses? Like, because the duplex, I mean, are you building up on that as well? Was there a reason why we excluded that?
As far as I'm concerned, the way I approached it was sort of how the House bill was laying out, 1,500 square feet for townhouses, that's a requirement. It's also, it would also be for, and I should have included this, cottages in a cottage cluster. If they're on their own lots, then the 1,500 square feet would work for a cottage in a cottage cluster. I'm making a note to make sure I have that. I know I think it's incorrect in the slide, but it's right in the code. And duplexes are permitted everywhere. A single family is permitted. So that's why it wasn't, I don't think it was a deliberate miss. It was just sort of, no, duplexes are sort of everywhere else that the single family is permitted. So that's why, because single unit or single detached dwellings are 3,000 square feet and up is sort of how we model that. So the 1,500 square feet is exclusively, at least the way this proposal works, for townhouses and then for cottages in a cottage cluster. That's how we proposed it.
Thank you for clarifying. I just wanted to make sure it wasn't something that we had discussed earlier, or like we had as a commission.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
So
Okay.
checking with a group, because I'm hearing, Vera, that your table is being presented according to discussion.
Great. Okay, terrific. Okay. And then, so I just have the one last section to go over. Okay. All right. And this had to do with the commission wanting some additional discussion about how else can we incentivize income restricted housing specifically. And from the things that I've been reading about how, how income restricted or sort of official affordable housing gets built, the way to incentivize that is to reduce the development cost. There's sort of certain things that the code can do, and then there are things that programming can do, or I guess, to put it crassly, the cash money that can go into this, because at some point you've got to finance that gap. But so programs can provide funding or reduce the costs, such as reduced SDCs or reduced application fees or that kind of thing. Those are programs. That's not something that the code can do. Different things that we can do. And honestly, we're doing quite a bit of it just in this regular code. I mean, the fact that we're allowing, middle housing, we're reducing lot sizes, we're talking about even further reducing parking requirements, that kind of thing. Those are all things that are already kind of getting us to some of these things. We have some code discussions in here as far as some of these reductions in parking that are specific to middle housing, to try to incentivize or sort of reward these smaller housing types. One thing that I found in a couple of other codes that I was looking at was to provide some more flexibility in the development itself by reducing some of the setbacks, for income restricted housing. So we could kind of create a kind of particular development standard for income restricted housing. And so you can see in the table that, although our options are limited within the zoning code, including reducing the off-street parking requirements, but maybe reducing the setbacks is another small way to provide some more flexibility in how the development can happen, particularly if it's a lot that, that extra couple of feet actually makes a difference in making something work. So reducing the minimum setbacks adds some flexibility, provides some more space on the lot to create one-story buildings, for example. Those are important for folks who need a one-story home because of preference or if they have limited mobility. Allows some additional space on the lot that might be needed for a triplex or a quadplex. That might make the difference of getting a couple of extra units on some of the smaller lots. It creates more lots where it's possible to add new homes without tearing down an existing home. Sometimes those setbacks are that 5 or 10 feet makes the difference between actually being able to add an additional unit to an existing lot that already has a home on it. And it could provide some flexibility to preserve trees, which doesn't necessarily need to be an income restricted incentive, but it's part of that whole kind of package of things that we might be able to do for an affordable proposal. But it could also mean it could kind of, I don't want to use the term backfire, but if this provides extra flexibility, it might kind of come back on us in the other way too. But additional flexibility seems like a good thing, and it seems like something that we might be able to work with. So these were some alternative standards that I saw that, I found in a couple of other codes that provided, these, additional reductions in setbacks. Oh, and then one other thing that that I read somewhere, that this kind of additional flexibility could provide enough flexibility to allow buildings that respond to different cultural values and practices. I mean, maybe there's some kind of a design or something that, having this extra flexibility may help provide some additional design flexibility too. I don't know that I have a specific example, but that was something that I read, that, if you allow for this, like I said, this extra flexibility, sometimes that design makes all the difference. So this was something that I wanted to, kind of throw out there as an additional item that we hadn't really talked about. But when I was going through some of the things that we were already doing in the code, zoning is sort of, we can only do so much, I guess, unless we want to start talking about, additional lot coverage and building height and sort of things like that. But if the idea is to sort of keep things fairly I don't want to say uniform, but kind of consistent, then maybe some of this additional small flexibility for income restricted housing might be something that the commission wants to think about. But basically, from a zoning standpoint, we don't have a lot of options, but we do have some. But I wanted to put this out there, something that I had seen in some of my research too. And I will stop sharing so we can talk about that.
Commissioner Edge.
Thank you, Chair. And thanks, Vera. So this is something that's really interesting to me, is trying to figure out how we can get more production in protected affordable housing. So all of this sounds really good in terms of being able to, incentivize that kind of that extra development. Now, what I'm wondering, how does this apply when, say, if you were to have 3 market rate units and 1 protected affordable unit?
Yeah. It's a great scenario question. Yeah. And that's likely, to have a percentage of the units be affordable, not the entire, maybe not the entire quadplex. You're asking a great question. That's something I think we could all think about. Is it enough to get, a percentage of the development to be income restricted? Particularly on something on a lot like that, I don't know how you would sort of have some flexibility for one of the units and not for the other, on a whole lot.
Right.
And it kind of, that would make it really hard, I think, for everybody to figure out. So, I think maybe that's, something to think about, if we are doing it, that if that's sort of the idea, is it, at least 50% of the units need to be income restricted? I'm making that up, does there need to be, or is it 20, is it 1 unit? Is there a percentage of the units? Yeah, no, you're raising a great question.
As we can get 1 extra unit of affordable housing, I would support fewer setbacks or, reduce setbacks.
Yeah.
And just to get 1, absolutely, I think it's worth it to help families on the margins. So I think this is a great, thank you for doing this. I think this is a great exercise that gets us talking about, what we actually have available to us in this toolkit.
Commissioner Sherman.
Thanks. We're just to make sure I'm clear, we're talking capital A, affordable housing, income restricted, regulated, 30, do we have a sense of what kind of horizon we're talking about? 30 years, 50 years? What is the,
let's see.
What is kind of the exchange?
The way that we've, at least in the parking section, so we would want to be using sort of a consistent definition of affordable housing within our code, sort of how we mean. But the way we are talking about it is it's affordable, equal to or less than 80% of AMI. So that's the percentage as defined by HUD. Guaranteed affordable for a minimum term of 30 years through restrictive covenant. So that's sort of how we've kind of define it as proposed in the code. Yeah.
Commissioner Khoshrabadi.
Couple of questions. Thank you, staff. Thank you, Chair. Vera, you mentioned that there could be some potential setbacks to this, like there could be another side to doing this. And I know Commissioner Edge mentioned a good scenario. Was there what other ways do you think this could come back and not work for what we're intending it for?
I think having additional space, could, sort of the idea of, if we can get 1 more unit, okay, we get 1 more unit, but that also be 1 more unit that might involve a tree removal. This is a completely made up scenario, but we have a tree code, that is sort of part of that whole process. That's why we're doing these together. It's adding more layers of things to talk about, but we have multiple things to think about. So, flexibility can go both ways. It sort of depends on who's wielding it, I guess, but it's probably worth it, in the end, to provide that flexibility and give folks some room to be creative, I think.
Thank you for refreshing my memory on that. That was one question. So I appreciate that. The other thing is on the rear yard, the 15-foot, is there any specific reason why we wouldn't make that 10 like the front yard? Or is that something that we could still potentially do just for more space?
Yeah, I mean, we certainly could. I think part of the reason is to have that little bit of extra space for folks to have, a garden or some outdoor space, that 15 feet, we currently our rear yards are 20 feet. 15 is a little bit smaller, but it still provides a little bit of useful space. 10 starts to feel like there really isn't any yard on the property. So it's subjective to be, there isn't, it was just something that kind of, I'll just say, felt better going down to 10, but that's certainly up to the commission to talk about. Yeah.
Makes sense. I dig it. I like this a lot. I mean, again, obviously there's going to be other additional specifications we have to add to it, but in terms of the income restricted housing, but I think this is huge because again, the flexibility, like you said, and if it does have any benefits on a cultural level, that's even better. I mean, so be it. I welcome it. So thank you.
Commissioner Heimer's been patient. Go ahead.
First time those two words have ever been put together. So I guess I want to understand what street side yard is. I take it that means a corner lot?
Correct.
And then how do you know when they fill out their application that this is a capital A affordable project?
Yeah, that's great. So yeah, we will need as part of their process, and I'll work with our community development department for the specific paperwork that you have to provide to show that it is affordable, that they have the right, again, they have the right restrictions and covenants that are required as part of that affordable, and our community development department side of the house knows what that paperwork is supposed to look like, and that would be coming in as part of their application and would get certified with their assistance. Similar to, for example, like the Coho project has a certain number of those units that are going to be affordable. So there's a process in-house, sort of back of house in our department that we can make sure that that's what's going to happen.
And then I guess my last question is that I guess I could own a property and rent it to somebody that is giving me, or that we're splitting the rent, that 50% is coming from a government assistance program and the other 50% is coming from the renter, right? Section 8 housing or whatever you want to call it. So does that take into account at all, or would it have to be something documented at time of application?
So I'm not an expert on, the Section 8 program and how those vouchers work, but my understanding was that, that's a voucher that you go out and you find a place to rent, but the rent itself is not subsidized, or it's not a lower rent. It's
correct. The government pays for half and the other person pays.
Right. So I think the way this is intended to work is that the unit itself is affordable. It's not. I don't think that the scenario that you're talking about is the same thing, but I can certainly.
So no, that's okay. That's okay. As long as right at time of development, that this is a predetermined, already self-supported system, right?
Right, but the unit is, the rent is set, the folks that rent it, meet certain income restrictions. There's definitely, there's stuff involved in making that happen. And that would certainly be something that would, help affordable housing builders or developers or, land trusts and those kinds of folks take advantage of the middle housing code, like a Northwest Housing as an example, to take a site and develop it and be able to manage that as an affordable housing, development or something like that. So that's generally, I think, how that would probably work.
Okay.
My guess.
All right.
Yeah.
All right. Perfect. Thank you.
Commissioner Sherman?
Thanks, Chair, for letting me come back at this for another bite at the apple. Appreciate it. Just thinking about Commissioner Edge's question earlier around, like, what if it's just one unit that's kind of proposed as affordable? I would really encourage us to think about how we may, if and how we can think about that unit is maybe substantially similar to the other units. Like I could imagine a scenario where you have, 2 3-bedroom duplex or a triplex with some 3-bedroom unit, 3-bedroom unit, and a studio. And I would really like to see, that studio is not the one being the affordable housing that gets those bonuses for the whole development, but that we're seeing something kind of substantially similar. And I think I also want to just kind of maybe encourage us to also think about, and again, I'm not quite sure how we do it from a code perspective, but how we could also make sure that we're getting family-sized units. Having previously worked in affordable housing, I know that this is a huge challenge, right? How do we kind of encourage 3-bedroom, 4-bedroom units? There's a huge gap in the market in this area. And so I don't know whether and how it could kind of fit in here, but I would love some creativity on that.
Commissioner Hamer.
Just one last opinion, I guess. I would love to have it tied into the ratios, right? Because I'd be willing to go for 0 parking and a 0 setback in the front if it was the lower echelon of the 30%, right? And maybe 10 feet at 50, but at 80, right? They're probably more than likely will have a vehicle of some type. They certainly are working families and probably with 2 jobs and children. So I would love to have it tied into those income levels. And if you're doing it pre-develop or at a pre-development conference, they should be able to kind of have their gear ready for what they're looking for as their renters or their occupiers, right? So I would like to have it tied into that income level, because then maybe we'll get more of these 30 and 50 buildings in, instead of just reaching out for the max of the 80, because it's probably, well, it's easier, I guess, to find more 80s than it is probably 30s and 50s. Does that make sense to everybody?
I know the financing for developments at those lower income levels is really difficult, and I think there is if I understand this correctly, there's a threshold of number of units that you're building to kind of make a project like that pencil. I don't know exactly how it all works, but I absolutely take your point. I don't know how many of these sort of the very low income developments will happen with, at like a 2 or 3 unit kind of project, because the dollars are pretty significant to get those there to gap finance that. But it's a good point. It's a good point that you're making. Thank you.
Vera, just to add my own couple of 2 cents here. I support the alternative setbacks that you're suggesting. I think the only caveat I would have would be to the backyard setback. I would want to protect that if I could, and just because that is, prized, valued private space. So I'd like not to encroach on that. But otherwise, I appreciate the study, and I think there's a lot of value there and would like to see it move forward. Commissioner Edge?
Thank you, Chair. So I was wondering if you could come back to the next hearing, Vera, and maybe shed some light on some of the pro formas for being able to get affordable housing in middle housing developments. I'd like to understand what the right number of units is, to be able to support affordable units and how that all works. And if are we, is this a swing and a miss on our part, or are we actually hitting, the right levers or pulling the right levers to be able to, incentivize this kind of development and actually get there and have it be produced and not just get a little bit closer, but not all the way. I'd like to figure that out so we can make sure we're being effective at incentivizing affordable housing in middle housing developments. Regarding rear yard setback, I appreciate wanting to have, some private space, and I think that makes sense. I'm not necessarily going to argue against that. What I'm wondering though is in say like a flag lot or rear lot situation, we do have, a little bit of a front setback required, obviously between, the parent lot, or the fore lot. But then there's also the backyard there. I'm wondering if we could do, what are those numbers, and would it make sense to maybe have the option of having the private yard be in the front? And so the larger setback would be between the new house and the rear lot and the front, the parent lot in front of it, instead of having it behind it. Just giving the developer the option of having that private space either in the front or in the back, since it is kind of by virtue of being a rear lot private to begin with.
Oh, I can take a look and see what that language would look like to kind of give that option, that they're showing that kind of private space either in the front or the back of the knee. I see what you're asking. So yeah.
And if I could just go back for a second, Commissioner Edge, to your point about bringing pro formas about what is the right number for, I'm not sure we're going to be able to do that because we're going to need to work with our community development department, because I know they've done a lot of work around this, but I think the approach could be that we could do a little bit of exploration, try to get a little bit better sense of what the right number is. And then if the Planning Commission did want to recommend further exploration of this topic and what that might look like to City Council, then we could work on that if City Council decided that that was the direction that they would want to go into as well. I just don't want to overpromise more information than we might be able to give you in the short time period between now and November 9th, which is really small window.
I appreciate the challenge involved with that, and I completely support that approach.
Okay, thanks.
I know how hard it is to find, the data you want in such a short time frame. So that's,
yep.
Commissioner Hemer has got his hand raised.
And I only bring this up, but I want this commission to think about the scarlet letter aspect of this. We are certainly defining low-income subsidized housing in a very direct way with the way that it sits on the neighborhood. And if people understand the code, then they can automatically point to that house and say, oh, that must be where the poor people live. And so there is a scarlet letter aspect to this idea. And so I would think about that I don't know if we're going to come to the conclusion tonight, but I think that's probably the number one major drawback of this idea, especially from a street view. I think in the rear lot, nobody would ever notice, but I think from the street, you certainly can give it a scarlet letter type look. So just think about that.
Greg, I tend to think the same, and particularly in the way that we're addressing parking as well. Parking is also an indication of wealth. And so not providing parking to certain houses, but providing parking to others, I think could be a mistake. Just want to put that out there as well. Vera, I want to ask you, I think you still have more to go. And so you've gotten a lot of feedback, maybe not necessarily consensus. I think there was pretty broad exception of that alternative path. Okay, with a few notes to make. So let's continue on with the slideshow.
Actually, the last slide is just a recap of the review schedule. So that actually was basically the conclusion of the presentation. That covered the questions that I had from the last meeting and the staff report. I think I might just, if I could, Chair Lusford, on the comment that you just made about sort of the provision of parking. I mean, I think what we're talking about is I mean, from our earlier parking discussion was what's the minimum required for all middle housing? You know, yes, there are some reductions that we're providing for affordable housing. And that's, but I think I'm wondering, as just as an observation, you know, the more that sort of the region is sort of getting away from all kinds of parking on site, at some point, you know, there will be, you'll never know who has parking or who does. I mean, you won't know what their financial situation is because there are so many properties in Portland, certainly, that don't have any parking, and they're fairly wealthy people as well. So I think it just, at some point, it's going to be very normalized, I think. And just as an observation, not, you know, I think that might be there at some point. But I think, you know, again, these are things that what we're requiring is a minimum, but folks can still build it. You know, we're not precluding folks from building on-site parking. You know, as part of these code amendments, it's sort of where are we going to get to from what they have to build. And that's, it makes a difference, I think, too. But I just wanted to, if that's okay, just wanted to comment on that. So anyway, but no, my last slide was just again a reminder of what we're doing tonight, but then on November 9th, that the focus was the development related tree code, and then these lingering questions, you know, from tonight. And that's it.
With that in mind, I think it makes sense then to continue, because we do have some very patient audience members, and I want to make sure that we get to them. So let me just make sure. So, Vera, that was the staff report. Now we move into testimony. And the first question out of that is whether or not we've received any correspondence.
So we did receive a couple of emails over the last couple of days that I forwarded to the commission today. One was from Bradley Bondi and one was from Tim Taylor. Both spoke very specifically about actually the items under discussion for tonight, and were generally in support of what was being proposed as far as the lot size reduction, as well as the reduction of the minimum parking to, I believe, the 0.5, because that was sort of the discussion point from the last meeting. But those were the two comments that came in. We did have a comment came in regarding the tree code, and we're sort of compiling all of those, and those will be part of the packet for November 9th. That
Right.
we'll receive.
Okay. Well, so let's move in then to other testimony. So do we have anyone in our audience this evening who would like to speak in support of the application? And if so, just use the raise your hand function so that you can be recognized.
Okay, I've got Stefan Lashbrook has very patiently had his hand up for quite some time. So Stefan, I am going to allow you to talk.
So Stefan, you know, but we will ask you to state your city of residence and your first and last name, of course, and then go ahead.
All right, thank you.
Yeah.
Yes, I know this drill very well. Stefan Lashbrook, I'm a resident of the Llewellyn neighborhood where I've lived for more than 20 years. I was a professional planner for more than 45 years, now glad to be long retired. And Vera can tell you I've forgotten most of what I once knew. But my comments are, first of all, I'll refer back to my letter to you of October 10th and say that I served on both the Comp Plan Advisory Committee and the Implementation Committee. And I'm generally supportive of the effort that you now have before you and your efforts as you churn your way through all this. And I certainly respect how much effort that involves. That said, I do have some concerns, which is not too surprising. I'll join those who pointed out that there rarely was an effort to develop a consensus at the implementation committee. It was more conversation and more trying out ideas. There were times when there was a consensus reached, but it certainly wasn't routine. So my comments can't even attempt to represent that group. They're mine and mine alone. And I would say that the biggest concern that I have about where you've gone with this so far has to do with parking reductions to 0.5 per unit or below. And to me, that is something that could be applied well and effectively in specific cases, but I would never make it applied generally. And my reasoning for that is that it will create a hardship in some situations. Certainly not across the board. I understand the parking study that was done, but it too was generalized. My issue is site-specific situations where you know you're going to end up with a whole lot of people parking on the street in places where the residents in the neighborhood have long parked. And it's about as simple as that. I think there will be big gripes about that. I see where this is going. I realize I'm just kind of adding my 2 cents to the record. I have deep concerns about that. I think you're going to move forward with it, and so I won't beat that one up anymore. My second one is much more arcane, and you haven't really even talked about it, but we did talk about it somewhat, a little bit at CPIC, and it's in my letter. It has to do with the definition of a half story in the code. It's a mess. And I point that out because you continue to use a half story to define maximum height allowance in certain situations. I take this neighborhood, for instance, in Llewellyn. There is a whole lot of these houses that look just alike. I mean, they're so similar, built by the same people, designed by the same people, yet a lot of them have basements and a lot of them don't. You can't tell by looking at these houses whether they have a basement or not, unless you walk right up and look at the foundation. My point is, why would you restrict the height allowance for one of those houses differently than for one of the others, based on whether it has a basement? So that I urge you to go back, get rid of the second sentence in the definition of a half story, or rewrite it so it more specifically applies to daylight basements and not basements in general. So I could go on. I have, a whole bunch of other things I could talk about. I want to thank you for all your work on this, and I'll continue to be involved through the tree code part because I did have responsibility for administering tree codes in 3 different cities. So I'll be with you.
Excellent, Stefan. I think the whole commission appreciates your insight and your patience remaining on the line. So I appreciate that very much. Does the commission have any questions, clarifying questions?
Sure. Thanks for your comments, Stefan. Did you want to, did any of the other stuff that you had kind of refrained from commenting about just a moment ago have to do with what we're talking about tonight? And did you want to offer any other comments about what we're discussing tonight?
I'm going to drag you all down a rabbit hole with this, but I've maintained for years, and I did bring it up at both the comp plan meetings and the CPIC meetings, that we should be looking at different setbacks on the north sides of lots that adjoin another lot at that point because of solar access. I say that because I live on a lot that's had an organic garden in the backyard since 1956. And development that could lead to shading that would be a real hardship. It's not something we're at risk of seeing at this particular lot. We're fortunate, but it could be in other places because there is also comp plan language in support of local food production and edible landscaping and things like that. So the reason why I said that would drag you down a rabbit hole is because that's a whole different field of setback and building height and building design type standards. I guess I'd ask you to file it away because I'll come back and talk about it again someday.
Well, thanks again for that and elaborating on that. I share the frustration maybe of not trying to really view our amendments in the full constellation of the adopted comp plan policies. We're really honing in on housing, trees, and parking. And it does kind of give us, a really narrow view. And so I appreciate that. And, I hope that we'll see you again when we get around to implementing those other policies.
I think you will.
Okay, I'm gonna move on. I think then Vera. Thank you again, Stefan. Neutral testimony. I think that we just covered. Well, no, that was support. So neutral testimony. Is there anybody in the audience who would like to support or provide neutral testimony?
Stefan is our only audience member.
Oh, I thought there were two people. Maybe it was.
Yep.
Maybe
There was. They left.
the applicant. Oh,
Yeah.
okay. All right, then I'm going to move on through neutral, rebuttal. So public testimony will continue to be taken during our November 9th hearing. So this is an opportunity then again for commissioners to discuss. We've had quite a bit of discussion throughout the presentation. Is there any kind of final thoughts from the commission that you want to add to this? Again, we are going to continue to the 9th. So I'll start with Commissioner Hemer.
Can we get a vote so that it doesn't bother me? Can we either do 0.333 on triplexes or 0.667 so that we come up with a round number, either 2 or 1 parking spot? I don't really care. I'll let somebody else make the decision, but can we do that so we don't end up with this 1.5, please, on triplexes? Or not? You just leave me hanging in the wind. It's all right. My wife loves it when we do this.
I had to find the mute button. I'm also thinking. Well, I mean, because there's also discussion about going to 0. So I just want to put that out there, first of all. So maybe the question should be whether or not we entertain 0 as a parking requirement across the board, and then we'll work our way up. So is there any consensus on modifying that parking requirement to 0? And I think raising your hand is probably the best way to just generally indicate consent and support.
I want to add some nuance to 0. I mean, I don't know that 0 is just the by right 0. Is that what you meant by right 0?
Yeah.
I mean, I'd support by right 0, but I think that really I was being a little bit more nuanced with my 0, and I wanted to get into a little bit of discussion about that before we kind of made a real decision. So is this our opportunity to kind of talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, let's talk it out.
Or did you want to really just? Okay. So what I'm thinking is that there's a market for housing with no parking, but obviously people that are living in housing with no parking will, need to use transit or, bike paths or, whatever. I mean, it doesn't just exist in a vacuum. And so what I'm wondering is, do we look at that frequent service network and proximity to the frequent service network and provide an opportunity for maybe on the smaller lots, like we were talking about, allowing a development with 0 parking if it's proximal to frequent service transit and on a smaller lot. Whereas if it wasn't close to frequent transit, then you'd require the 1 space or whatever. And that's kind of that tiered approach where the smaller lots would only require 1 space regardless of the building type, and the middle-sized lots would require 2 regardless of the building type, and the larger lots would require 3 if it was, more than a duplex. So under that scenario, would there be an option to write that down by 1 space if we were proximal to a frequent service? And proximal means a 10-minute walk.
Okay.
So I guess it'd have to be codified as clear and objective somehow. So half mile or whatever it is.
Right.
Vera?
I'm so sorry to interrupt but I'm trying to tie this to what we already have existing code language for. So this sounds like we're connecting our by right reduction. It's a different kind of reduction than a percentage, of course. But our existing by right reduction for proximity to, the way we define it right now in the code, is a 500-foot walking distance, which is defined what that means, 500-foot walking distance, to a transit stop with peak hour service frequency of 30 minutes or less. So that's in our existing code. That's what we mean by public transit that gets you a reduction in parking. So if that's acceptable, then I just kind of wanted to just point out that our code has kind of what that standard is already. And if that's an acceptable standard, then it's kind of an idea. I think then it's understanding, well, what's the reduction? Because it sounds like, and I understand that we're sort of talking about this tiered approach for lot size as well. So I'm just trying to get it clear in my head what this table is going to look like on the 9th that summarizes what this recommendation is. So, but I just wanted to clarify that we have a standard already in our existing code for the transit piece.
Yeah, and what I'm wondering is that transit standard. You know, what I would like to, what I wish we could do, and maybe we can, maybe we can't. What I wish we could do is just refer to TriMet's frequent service system, because they manage their system, their route network, they control frequencies, they have buses, they have specific routes that are branded for frequent service, and then they throw resources at them to make sure that they are frequent service and that they meet that standard, you know, and that standard may get redefined depending on, you know, circumstances. And but if we defer to their definition of the frequent service network, then we don't have to worry about whether something drops below a 20-minute frequency or a 15-minute frequency or a 30-minute frequency. We just worry about, is this, you know, does our transit district consider this to be a frequent route, a frequent service route? And if so, trust that they're handling that appropriately, and then gear our policies towards that. That would be my preference, because I don't necessarily like that 30-minute, but you know, the state has definitions around 4 times an hour.
I just don't want to get hung up on that necessarily, Commissioner Edge, because I think that it is important, but that's not the root cause here.
Yeah, I mean, there was one thing where I think Commissioner Hamer and I kind of saw eye to eye on this, you know, in terms of the frequent service network being the thing and not just generically transit, you know, but the frequent service network. And so I see a flaw with how we define that, and I would like to use a different system to define that so that there's consistency and predictability in the standard.
So can you restate
beyond? Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to ask if you would restate then, just for Vera and keeping clear that, you know, in her mind, she's rewriting this table. What then would be your recommendation, assuming that we come to a agreement on what frequent transit is and how it's defined per lot?
So assuming that we have a definition we're happy with for frequent transit,
yes,
then it would be the walking distance metric to frequent transit, which maybe is 500 feet, maybe is longer. You know, I don't know what, but we should have a standard for that, and perhaps a regional standard would be better than our own in-house standards.
Right.
And so if there's a regional standard for walking distance from a transit stop, let's use that. Now that we're on to regional standards.
Thank you.
Then my preference would be at that point to have a downward reduction of the parking by right for if it was the tiered approach by 1 space, if it was a ratio approach, then a quarter space or a, you know, another half space or whatever. I mean, I'm not sure where we're starting with, but a reasonable fraction removed from the standard. I
guess that's my question, is where are we starting at, right? Because that's another part of the discussion.
If we were starting at 0.5, then, you know, you would want to write it down by a quarter. But if you were starting at 1, you'd want to write it down by a half, or, you know what I mean? I think it just kind of, that depends on, that would drive that would be a big factor in, I think, what the units would be that we're using, is where we're starting from as a base.
So as a group, I was hearing more often than not support of 0.5 as a starting point. Commissioner Massey, I make point that you were hearing that the CPIC had identified one parking spot and that you felt there was good reason for them to have done that and that we should probably follow suit with that. But I otherwise was hearing 0.5.
Yeah, I'm more inclined to start at 1, and you know, this 0.5 has been, you know, talked about earlier as kind of one of these concepts that's kind of hard to get your brain about, and I really don't know what happened in the CPIC, but I just know that when the CPIC meetings were done and the staff report was generated and it was compared to the model standard, the answer was 1. And so I'm perfectly willing to entertain ideas about a tiered approach on reductions, but I think that starting at 1 is just a more prudent approach, because if we allow the developers to, they can build as many parking spots as they can get on the property and that kind of thing. But if you also allow them just to spill the parking out into the street, then they have the option to do that if we allow them to do it. And I appreciate all the good work and all the real data that went into the parking study, but it was a snapshot of now, and I think that that's going to change if we have more middle housing.
Okay, appreciate that, Commissioner Sherman.
Thanks, Chair Losfeld. I don't know if you floated it as a trial balloon for a reason, but I'll bite on your why not start at 0 for middle housing. Again, we're not talking about single dwellings, which is the vast majority of our stock. For middle housing, I'm willing to bite at having no minimum required parking across the board. Again, I think the evidence is very clear that we have ample amount of supply. If and when we ever had problems, the city has tools such as parking permits, such as enforcement, in order to manage those problems. But I frankly don't think we'll have those problems for, a decade or more. So I think, again, in terms of helping unlock middle housing opportunities, I think setting that minimum requirement at 0, again, the market might provide some, because that's what the market might be willing to do. Certainly willing to entertain that. And I want to just add a personal note, kind of in response to Stefan's comment. I live within eyesight of Milwaukee Cafe, which is amazing. Love walking up there and getting coffee and getting breakfast. But you know what that also means? That also means I get a lot of people parking in front of my house. And as somebody who also works as a transportation professional, sometimes I will admit it irks me when I've got somebody parked out there for half the day or a little too far into my driveway. But I also have to remind myself, I don't own the right of way. That's not my space. And that's what my driveway's for. That's where, if I've got friends, they've got to park down the street. So, I think we can adapt, and I'm willing to go to 0.
Thank you, Commissioner Sherman. Commissioner Ernst?
So thanks for the discussion and all of the staff work and everybody's amazing points, because I've been listening, and everybody has really good arguments for everything. I did like Commissioner Edge's overall kind of broad view of how much impact is this really going to have, given what space we have to even develop properties in the future. So just based off of kind of all of the different arguments that I'm hearing, I'm landing more around 0.5 or 0.25, or the 0.33 or what, kind of in there. I'm not quite at 0. I'm not quite at 1. I wouldn't mind having the option. I think that that's what we're talking about as far as, a tier or some option for some properties to be at 0. But I wouldn't say like a standard minimum. I'm not quite there on a standard minimum yet. I think that we're just going to be in this huge transitional period for the next, it won't be 50 years, but for the next 10, 15 years is my estimate for autonomous ride-sharing vehicles. I think that once we take out the actual driver part of it, and when we have more subscription-based autonomous vehicles where you can pay a monthly fee and it drives to your house and then you can drive it or kind of keep it at your house or keep it even for a day or two and then it goes back. I think that that will shift a lot of things in the future. So I don't see that there's going to be as much of a need for parking in 10, 15, 20 years, but there's great argument. There is a lot of argument for right now and for that interim of building. It's hard. Parking's hard right now. So I'm not quite at 1 and I'm not quite at 0. I'm in there.
Well, what I do hear you saying, Commissioner Ernst, is that you are in favor of maybe a tiered structure, just not quite ready to pin down a minimum.
Not at 0 for, yeah.
But that it may scale up or scale down according to the lot size.
Well, and like access to public transportation and and lot size.
Okay, right.
I could see how that would work.
Okay. Commissioner Hemer?
Here, can you throw up the tiered approach slide so we can look at it so that we all remember what we're looking at?
Oh, I can. Before I do, though, because I think the tiered approach that I had put up was from the model code, which I think is different, but that's different from what Commissioner Edge is proposing, I think, because I guess from what I heard from Commissioner Edge, it's just by lot size, not by housing type. And the model code glues the housing type onto that. I just want to make clear that there's a difference between what that slide showed and I think what Commissioner Edge is proposing. But if I'm wrong, I'm happy to be corrected.
Let's just use that as our example.
Got it. Nope. I just wanted to make sure. Okay. Let's see. And I think while I'm finding the slide, I think Laura took a look at the frequent transit map. Do I have that right?
Yeah, so I was just looking at the frequent transit map, and I realized that there's only one frequent bus line that runs in the city of Milwaukee, which is the one on King Street, if I understand the map correctly. So we're very limited. So I don't know, we want to be careful about limiting whatever decisions we make on one bus line at the time.
Well, that's TriMet's fault.
It should be the 33 and the 75.
Okay.
It should also be the 75 that runs on 32nd Avenue.
So again, even if it's 2, there's only going to be 2 areas that this would apply to if we're using frequent transit as a
does the max line not also play into that?
The max line, yeah, it's definitely frequent.
Also, just kind of thinking, I guess with using the frequent transit as kind of a baseline, that's also, I guess, taking away parking spaces because there tends to be more businesses around there too, where people do go and need parking. So I don't know how much that would make sense tying it to that.
We've seen, I was just started to chime in. We've seen maps prepared by consultants for some of their planning submittals in the past where they're taking, frequent transit, putting the putting the 500 or 1,000-foot buffer on it for the city. And frankly, it covers most of the city. I mean, there's some exceptions in probably the northeast corner of the city, and then there's some exceptions kind of in the southeast corner of the city. But using frequent transit is almost a proxy for the whole city, depending on how big of a buffer that is.
Well, and
Okay, so I'm sorry, Laura, I didn't mean to cut
Sorry.
you off.
No, that's okay. I was just going to say, I think that there's a lot of flux right now with frequent transit and what's going to be happening with TriMet and their routes based on just kind of the situation that we're in. So it's kind of a little hard to predict the future right now around what might be considered frequent and whatnot, because I think service changes will be made, but that's just a minor point.
Okay, we have now the slide that you requested, Commissioner Heimer.
Right, so I wanted to use this as our jumping off point, because I think this is really what we're trying to get to, because we allow everything on at least 3,000 square foot lots, right? So we have this kind of 3,000 square foot lots to 4,000 to 5,000 is two, right? Two parking. So it wouldn't matter what you were building, let's just say, you would just allow two. Wouldn't matter if it's a duplex, quadplex, blah, 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 right? If you did lots 5,000, you require three. Now, of course, you're not going to build three if you're only doing a duplex of that size of a lot. And for, lots greater than 7,000, you can call it 4. But you kind of have to work it, right, scale it back for each one. I think that this is a good starting place, and I think what gets us to what we want in the long run. If we start at 1 and work our way back, but if we look at the lot size too, so 1 per unit, right? We start at that. And then if we just give it 1 reduction down, so you say a quadplex then is 3, a triplex is 2, a duplex is 1, right? And we scale it down that way. That gets us to the same 0.5 almost, right? And we can make it a quadplex is 2. We can make it a triplex is 1. And we can make it a duplex is 1. And I think that gets to Commissioner Massey's point as well. It does not get us to 0. And I don't think I would vote no if it was 0. I think that there is still concern out there that we need at least a little bit of off-street parking. So I would be willing to start at this number at, a reduction of 1 based on the unit. So a quadplex 3, a triplex 2, a duplex 1. And then we can work off of those numbers as a starting point, instead of working in these percentages, I guess, which gets us to those same almost percentages. Does that make sense to everybody?
Yes. I just want to ask the group, and since we're not in gallery mode, is anybody in support of that method as it's been stated? Because I am trying to get us to a consensus, and we're a little bit all over. So is there anybody who generally supports that notion that it's by? Commissioner Massey is raising his hand. Are you raising your hand to talk? Are you raising your hand to support? Support. Okay. Anybody else want to jump on that bandwagon? Okay. So we've got 2 people who are interested in. Commissioner Edge.
Yeah, I mean, I'm pretty close to, I think, where Commissioner Heimer is on this. I think what I'm more comfortable with is really just focusing on the lot size and not the structure type, except obviously duplexes, cap at 2. And so what I'm wondering is, in that kind of the smallest tier, which is the 3,000 to 5,000, one required space, period. And then that could be written down to 0 if you're proximal to frequent transit, right? If you're on a middle-sized lot, 5,000 to 7,000, then it's 2 required spaces, but it could be written down to 1 space if you're proximal to frequent transit. And then the largest lot size, the 7,000 plus, the same thing. It would be 3 to start with. You could write it down 1 for being proximal to frequent transit. And that gets it down to, if it's a quadplex on the larger lots, you end up with 2 spaces, which is 0.5, which is what, kind of the target we were trying to get to closer to transit, I guess. I mean, that kind of sounds like a middle of the road option to me. It's not quite as aggressive as where I maybe was hoping that we would get, but it also gives us kind of room to acknowledge that we have some additional capacity to absorb, a little bit of excess parking.
Before
a lot of it, but that's kind of where I was going with that proposal is,
Right. And before we get to numbers, I just want to get to consensus on the way in which we're organizing it. So lot size is a second option. So is there anybody here who could support a lot size option based metric versus a duplex or a triplex?
I guess would a challenge with lot size on a pure lot size basis be you build a triplex on a big lot that then the big lot says you need 4 spots, and now you're above
3.
No, okay. So you build a duplex. You build a duplex on a big lot, and now you have to build 3 spots. So it is tied. It's not just the lot size. Then it's also tied to the housing type.
We can't require more than 1 per unit.
Okay. So even though the math might tell even though the lot size math might tell you should have more, the cap then comes in. Okay, which is confusing. I mean, I guess one thing is like that we're kind of like trying to build like the perfect mousetrap. It sounds like.
And I do want to make sure we're leaving the cottage cluster parking alone, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
I didn't get any hands raised on that. Lot size.
Oh, I thought Adam raised his hand at least.
I did, yeah, I did. Yeah, I'm good with I'm good with doing it based on lot size. That's fine. I'm just trying to figure out. Remind me again. Why are we going away from the half the space? Is it just because of the triplexes? So we don't have a 1.5 number. So we don't end up with 1 spot instead of 1 spot.
No, I was trying to get us to decide on lot size versus unit type first, and then get to a point where we're discussing
Was this the foundation of the discussion? Was the issue with having 1 spot potentially for a triplex?
That was a part of it, yes.
It seems like we're moving away from the half a spot on a lot of these for just the triplex. Can't we just specify just for triplexes what we want specifically? Do we have to change it for all across the board?
It's an option. I will say it's an option.
I don't want to make it even more complicated, but it just
Yet another option.
It just doesn't seem like just for the triplex we should change it for everything. Like I don't understand why we would do that if we were all pretty much good with the 0.5. It seems like we're changing. Yeah. Can we just specify because the triplex is an odd number?
We can, yes. I think ultimately we're looking to make a recommendation, and that could be added in there. And it's a recommendation that the city council consider it. And so ultimately city council then makes that determination.
So
Mr. Kashrabadi, before I move on, did you have anything else?
No.
Okay. All right. Folks, I'm here. We're not getting anywhere necessarily here. Because Commissioner Sherman, as you're bringing up, that we're just making this more convoluted. And so do you have a proposal for getting us out of?
Sure. I think as Commissioner Khosrowshahi was just kind of saying, I think I would recommend we return back to the 0.5 spots kind of per unit for middle housing as the starting point. And it appeared to me that we had a majority of the commission. Unfortunately, we might not have consensus on that topic. And so maybe we can jump off from that point as the starting point, as opposed to trying to kind of figure out a bunch of alternative approaches where we still might not land on consensus anyways. How does that sound, Chair?
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think most of us were feeling comfortable or somewhat comfortable with a 0.5 starting point, which I think, I mean, Vera, which is what you're recommending. So then the question would just be how that's scaled. What's the metric? Commissioner Khosrowshahi?
Can we say, okay, everything except for a triplex. Triplex will start at 2. Everything else is half, is 0.5. Because even if you go to a quadplex, you're going to have 2 if you do it by the half as a starting point. So you're still minimizing parking.
Wait.
You're still reducing.
You could do half and then just have the maximum cap, the cap at 2.
Right, just on the for triplex, because that seems like the only issue is the triplex. So we start with 2 on the triplex and work down. All other middle housing, it is at the 0.5. Can we not do it that way?
Commissioner Edge.
I think Greg beat me, but I'll take the chance to talk really quick. I don't know. I mean, I agree. We're really, complicating this so that we can try to address this really specific scenario that I think is going to be an incredibly small subset of the overall development that we're going to see over the next 20 years. I would like to remind everyone that if we look back to 2009 and we look at the productivity of building permits in the last 11 years, we would see 4 total middle housing units from that productivity. So I really don't want to obsess over that. I honestly, I'm ready to say 0 parking required again, because I'm really looking at 24 units of middle housing from our entire buildable lands inventory. What are we even worried about?
It's almost not worth the time to have the conversation, to be honest. It's pretty minute.
Do you know how much money we've spent on this process? And we're looking at 24 additional units of middle housing. I'm almost said affordable, and I don't mean that. I mean middle housing, not necessarily affordable. So this has been a big, expensive process. It gets more expensive by the minute. The impacts are not that great. I would really like to see us be aggressive about trying to help the families at the margins that will be impacted by these requirements or not. I want more people to have access to housing. And so I'm ready to write this down to 0 with you guys right now, because I'm not convinced that 48 cars from 24 units over the next 20 years is going to create a noticeable impact to anybody. So I'm going to be as aggressive with this as this commission is willing to be. I'm willing to support 0.
Thank you. Commissioner Hemer?
What Commissioner Edge is not telling you is that housing is based on comps. So that person with the driveway next door is going to get sold as the same with the person without the driveway. And all you're doing is putting money into the pocket of the developer. So when you think about it that way, right? So then we could say, oh, well, we'll go to 0, which actually won't make a difference in the market of what that house is being sold for. Maybe $5,000, but your driveway probably costs you 15 to 30, right? When you look at all of it. So all you're doing is just lining the pockets. So let's look at it this way. Let's stick with what we have, the 0.5, except we just worked on the triplex to either make it 0.333, so 1 parking spot, or 0.667 to make it 2. And I think that we can all agree, at least in concept, of that, and let's not bring it down to absolute 0.
Okay. Commissioner Sherman?
I'm ready to go to 0.
Thank you. Commissioner Kashrabadi?
Let's just go to 0.
Okay, I'd like to take a motion or at least some type of potential consensus, not that we're actually taking a motion, but all of those who are in favor of going to 0, let's just raise your hand and see if we're there yet. We are there. So Vera, I just want to recognize that the Planning Commission majority is showing 0 parking.
May I just ask for a clarification on that 0? Does that apply to townhouses and does that apply to cottage clusters?
I think we were not applying that to cottage clusters.
Okay.
But for
And-
townhouses, I don't think that we did clarify that. And I think there's anybody in favor of a 0 for townhouses.
They're functionally equivalent to other types of attached housing, correct? So I don't really see a difference that we're distinguishing for.
Well, townhouses are on their own lot. It's an attached single unit dwelling. It is middle housing, yes. I just wanted to make sure that that as a housing type was also being captured as part of the 0, or is it just cottage clusters that are not 0? So
I think it's cottage clusters alone.
okay.
Commissioner Sherman?
Sorry, I'm just kind of clarifying the question on townhouses. Where are we including townhouses or not in that? Sorry.
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes.
And then to the question about cottage clusters, could staff, maybe share some upsides, downsides to the conversation about further reducing minimums, either here or at our next meeting?
Yeah, I mean, if it's specific to cottage clusters, I mean, providing parking has the same impact as it does developing, any middle housing, right? So cottage clusters having to provide the way the code is written right now, it's 1 per dwelling unit in our moderate density zones, and it's 0.5 in our high density zones. So per cottage. So that's what the proposal is right now. And, just like anything, providing parking on site, adds to the cost of a development. That's nothing new. I just wanted to understand and make sure I knew kind of what this proposal was, what your proposed amendment or recommended amendment covered. So if you did want to further reduce the cottage cluster, or cottage clusters can still take advantage of the by right reductions as well. So they're not stuck at 1, if they're proximate to transit, the code provides, for a reduction, as well already. And then of course they have the parking modification process as well. So if they meet those standards, we can get them down even further with the reductions. So that's fine too.
Commissioner Sherman?
Just as follow-up, and I don't expect you to have it handy, Vera, but I do remember some of the cottage cluster mock-ups that we had kind of looked at before, and with some parking arrangements, kind of talking about that. If you had your whiz-bang PowerPoint able to just zoom onto the screen right now, and I would be interested in having a conversation about any whether or not anybody else would be interested in entertaining additional reductions there for cottage clusters. I think functionally, right, again, it's more units. Cottages are going to be smaller. They're going to be more affordable. And if parking is the thing that's getting in the way of our goals, let's build housing for people, not cars.
If I may suggest, since we are talking about the cottage clusters, right, as I said, in our moderate density zone, which is the majority of our residential densities, it's 1 per. I might suggest maybe the commission consider that 0.5 that we were talking about. You could make that in the moderate density zones so that it's the same as in the high density zone. And it's, there's a connection. I mean, there's a logic, to that. If you were considering not wanting to go down to 0 for cottage cluster, but you could provide a 0.5 in the moderate density zone for cottage clusters.
I would support that. Commissioner Edge?
Yeah, I support that too. And I just want to elaborate a little bit on why, because, here we are talking about going to 0 and then, but let's require some parking for cottage clusters. It sounds a little contradictory. And so I just want to kind of elaborate on why I think it's okay. And I think it's okay because the cottage clusters are usually going to be on larger lots. They're usually going to be able to contribute a little bit more space. They're possibly going to be further away from transit, and further away, and I feel like, when the market kind of gets its bearings and you look back on this after 30 years, you're going to see that the middle housing is creeping towards, is really clustered around the transit and the neighborhood hubs, and the cottage clusters are going to be more kind of scattered throughout the neighborhoods. And so, I feel like the cottage clusters are a better candidate to at least contribute some of the parking for the residents, particularly when it's not proximal to transit or neighborhood hubs. And so that's why I feel like that's okay to do, and I would support 0.5 for cottage clusters.
Commissioner Ernst?
Thank you, Commissioner Edge. I agree with the reasoning, and the argument as far as how much is actually going to be impacted and developed is kind of why I'm willing to go to 0 or be still kind of around that 0.25, and then it makes sense with the cottage clusters. I just wanted to add, again, in 30 years, we're going to see a completely different landscape as far as transportation. It will not look like what it looks like now. So when I'm talking about autonomous vehicles, people will have subscriptions, but we will also have, like when we were worried about the plug-in and the charging and that kind of thing, we will have kind of high-rise or parking garages that autonomous vehicles, humans don't go in there. Well, I mean, except for maintenance crews and stuff, but I will pay a monthly subscription to my autonomous vehicle, and maybe I'll share it with another family, or maybe it will just be me and my partner or whoever I'm with. And that autonomous vehicle will drive, a mile, 2 miles, 5 miles down the road to a high rise where a lot of different people's autonomous vehicles will be parked and charging. And I will push a button on my app. My vehicle will come to my door in 5-10 minutes, and then I will go, and then it will go park itself, or it'll come back and pick up my roommate. And then that will take them to where they're going. So the way that transportation will work in the next 30 years definitely is nowhere near what the parking needs are going to be right now or for the next 10, 15, 20 years. So in 30 years, parking needs, the parking in general will be a completely different landscape, because we will have these kind of, I want to say high-rise parking garages, but it's more of, drive it on, and it will be an elevator system where it just rotates your car down, and an autonomous vehicle that you own or that you subscribe to will come pick you up and drop you off. So I don't think the garages will be a thing in 50 years for sure. I mean, there will always probably be some economic step up and step downs, but for generally speaking, garages and parking spaces will not be how we see them today.
Thank you, Commissioner Ernst. So again, trying to build consensus here, thinking about our cottage clusters. Are we feeling as though 0.5 parking requirement, am I getting anywhere with that number? with this group?
I'm willing to go for that.
Okay. So I'm seeing majority. I'm seeing a couple people not voting, assuming that's not in support. So Vera, I think you have what you need in terms of parking. I think we've come full circle. I'm just wondering, Vera, in the rest of your presentation, whether flag lots or otherwise, did you get what you needed? Did you feel like you had kind of the majority of the group? Laura's shaking her head.
Yes, I have everything I need. I think the incentives, the alternative standard for income restricted housing on the setbacks. So that, sort of that, the sort of the flexibility on the setbacks. I think I heard that everyone was okay with that. I understood that there was a little bit of front yard or backyard and how to kind of make that private space something that is flexible. I'll need to see how to figure out a clear and objective standard for sort of where that goes and understand that. But generally, it sounds like minus sort of the super details, the idea of those alternative setbacks for income restricted housing was supportable. But I understand that we'll sort of need to think about, is that doing anything when it comes to sort of the overall financing of an income restricted project? And I understand that, but it's something. It's at least a starting point, and I think I understood that folks were supportive of that, at least sort of in concept. So
Okay.
yeah, that's
what else.
Got what I need. No, parking was the big one. Yeah. Yep.
Okay, then I'm going to move on.
Thank you for a terrific discussion, everyone. I really, really appreciate it.
Well, thank you, Vera, for bringing way more detail to this discussion and, giving us the opportunity to kind of debate these points at a finer grain. I think this has been really valuable tonight, and really appreciate your time. So then I will now entertain a motion to continue the public hearing to November 9th, 2021. Do I have a motion?
Also move, continue the hearing for middle housing code to date certain of November 9th.
Second.
I have a motion and it has been seconded. To all those in favor? Aye. Everybody in favor, thank you very much. Okay, moving on then to other business. Do commissioners or staff have other business? We talked about a good bit of other business at the top of the agenda. Laura, in terms of community events, but go ahead.
Oh, I just wanted to say, just remind everybody that we have a new community development director starting next week. So you will get to meet him at some point, Joseph Briglio. And then also we have a new planner joining our team, which we're really excited about, a new associate planner named Adam that's going to be with our team. So you will get to meet him soon in the future as well.
Excellent. Great. Anyone else? Okay. Do commissioners have any other items for discussion?
Sure, I'll just throw out there really quick that last Tuesday, the City Council heard a presentation from Eco Northwest and the Oak Lodge Governance Project Steering Committee. And it's up on YouTube, and it's a really interesting discussion, really about an hour or more of discussion on that subject matter and Q&A from the city councilors. And it was really interesting, and I encourage any of you who might be interested in that to watch it.
Joseph, would you mind sending that link to us in email?
I'll make sure that staff gets it out to you, yes.
Okay, thank you.
I'll make sure, or actually, Laura and Vera, you probably know where to get the link to that. So if you could distribute that link, that would be appreciated.
Appreciate that. Okay, next up. Oh,
I tuned in, and I think Greg did as well. And Joseph, I'd just be curious, any impressions on how the conversations are kind of going with folks in the Oak Lodge area?
too early to say. The governance project, Oak Lodge Governance Project, just received the report from the consultant team at the end of September. And so the volunteer group is, now going out into the community and giving presentations to, different, governments and community groups and everything. And so we're really just embarking on that process and should be hearing feedback from the community along the way. And that will inform future research or future phases of research. But beyond that, it's still really preliminary. And so, no, I don't have any sense of the public sentiments yet.
Okay, Vera, we move on then to forecast, or Laura, sorry, forecast.
Yep, no problem. So November 9th, we've got the continuation of the hearing tonight where the focus is going to be the tree code. And then we also have another ADU conversion variance that night. And then right now, the November 23rd, we don't have any items for that evening. So right now it's looking like that night's going to be canceled for the Planning Commission. So you can head into your Thanksgiving holidays.
I would support that, Laura.
There's nothing scheduled for now, and we don't intend to schedule anything.
Good.
Are we expecting a big turnout for the November 9th for the tree?
We have had a fair amount of testimony around that, so I wouldn't be surprised if we do have a decent amount of folks show up to testify, yes. But I can't predict. We cannot predict who will actually come, but we have gotten some testimony.
Do you know when we should be getting the package for that?
The package for that always goes out on the Tuesday or Wednesday before the meeting. Tuesday before the meeting, so you'll get it next Tuesday. All right.
Thank you, everybody. I will take a motion to adjourn. Don't all go at once.
Let me adjourn.
Has been
Second the
moved. Do
motion.
I have a second? I have a second. Do we all agree? All those in favor? Aye.
Thank you.
everybody.
Good night.
Right.
Night, everyone.
Good night.